Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world long faded, where the flicker of a hearth casts shadows on rough stone walls, and the air carries the scent of stale ale, damp wool, and something faintly like regret. Picture yourself trudging along a muddy, rutted path, the kind that seems to stretch into nowhere, with the weight of a day's journey pressing down on your shoulders. The sun is dipping low, painting the horizon in bruised shades of violet, and you're desperate for shelter. Then, through the mist, you spot it, a weathered sign swinging on creaking chains, promising rest at a medieval inn. It's not a grand castle or a quaint cottage, but a gritty, ramshackle refuge where travelers, merchants, and maybe even a rogue or two huddle against the uncertainties of the road. This isn't the romanticized tavern of fantasy novels, all polished wood and merry minstrels. No, this is the real deal. A place of respite, yes, but also of raw edges and whispered dangers. So, settle in as we peel back the layers of history to uncover what these medieval inns were really like, where the line between comfort and chaos was as thin as the straw mattress you might, or might not, sleep on. Imagine yourself pushing open the heavy wooden door, the iron hinges groaning under the weight of countless hands before yours. A wave of warmth hits you, mingled with the sharp tang of smoke and the low murmur of voices. You're not just stepping into a building, you're stepping into a crossroads of human lives, a place where stories collide as often as tankards. These inns weren't just pit stops. They were lifelines in a fragmented, often brutal world. Back in the Middle Ages, roughly between the 5th and 15th centuries, travel wasn't a leisure activity. It was a necessity, often a gamble with your life. Whether you were a pilgrim seeking salvation, a merchant hauling goods, or a knight on some lord's errand, the road was a gauntlet of bandits, weather, and sheer exhaustion. Inns offered a flicker of hope, a chance to rest without worrying too much about a dagger in the dark or a wolf at the door. But let's not get too cozy with the idea just yet. Here's your reality check. If you found yourself at a medieval inn, you probably wouldn't survive this night unscathed, at least not without a strong stomach or a sharper wit. These places weren't exactly 5-star establishments. Think less room service and more room if you're lucky, and don't ask what's in the stew. You might share a bed with a stranger who snores like a boar, or worse, one who's got sticky fingers and an eye on your coin purse. Hygiene. Let's just say the concept was still on a long pilgrimage of its own. A bath might mean a quick splash in a trough if the innkeeper felt generous. And the privy, well, let's not ruin the mood by dwelling on that particular adventure. Now, before we wander further down this shadowy path, I've got a little request. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a small gesture, but it means the world to me as we keep exploring these forgotten corners of history together. And while you're at it, why not drop a comment with where you're retuning in from and what time it is there? Are you curled up under a blanket in a quiet corner of the world, or stealing a moment in the middle of a busy day? I'm curious to know who's joining me on this late night, or whenever it is for you, journey. Let's ease back into the scene though, and consider what kind of place you've stumbled into. Medieval inns weren't just slapped together without thought. Oh no, they were often the heart of a village or a vital stop along a trade route, and their very existence was shaped by the chaos of the era. A mainstream tidbit for you: many of these inns popped up during the height of the pilgrimage boom, especially along routes to sacred sites like Canterbury or Santiago de Compostela. The church was a big player in travel back then, and inns often doubled as waypoints for the faithful, offering a roof over your head and maybe a prayer for your soul, if you could afford it. But not everything about these places was so pious. Here is a quirky little fact to chew on. Some inns were rumoured to have secret tunnels or hidden rooms, not for romantic trysts, but for smuggling goods or hiding from the law. Imagine sipping your watery ale, blissfully unaware that beneath your feet, a stash of contraband wool or even a fugitive was tucked away. It's the kind of thing that makes you wonder what else you didn't notice while you were busy dodging the innkeeper AS overpriced bread. Speaking of innkeepers, let's have a little chuckle at their expense. You'd think running an inn was all about warm hospitality, right? Well, some of these folks were more like medieval bouncers, deciding who got a spot by the fire and who got to sleep in the stable with the mules. If you didn't have the right look or the right coin, you might find yourself out in the cold, literally. And here is another laugh for you. The idea of a menu at an inn, forget it. You ate what was slapped down in front of you, and if you complained, well, good luck explaining customer service to a guy who has got a ladle in one hand and a temper in the other. It's almost like the medieval version of you get what you get and you don't throw a fit, except throwing a fit might land you in a ditch. One more jest before we get too serious. Privacy at an inn was about as common as a dragon in your backyard. Want a room to yourself? Sure, if you've got the wealth of a minor lord and the charm of a bard. Otherwise, you're bunking with whoever else paid their penny, snoring, coughing, and all. It's like the worst slumber party you've ever been to, minus the popcorn, and plus a suspicious rash by morning. Now let's ponder a deeper question, one that scholars still debate over dusty tomes and lukewarm coffee. Were medieval inns truly havens of rest, or were they more like opportunistic traps for the weary? Some historians argue that innkeepers often exploited travelers, charging exorbitant rates for meager fare and questionable safety. Others counter that inns were a necessary evil, a rare anchor in a world where trust was scarce, and the next village might be a weak as perilous trek away. It's a tension that lingers in the air of these old stories. Were you a guest, or merely a mark? Take a moment to reflect on this. What would you risk for a night's shelter when the alternative is the open road under a merciless sky? As we linger on that thought, let's set the stage for the rest of our exploration. We've only just crossed the threshold of this medieval inn, and already the air is thick with questions, sense, and the weight of untold tales. There's so much more to uncover. The creak of the timber walls, the clink of mugs in the common room, the whispers of danger in the night. So, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you linger in the dim, flickering glow of the medieval inn, the weight of the journey still clinging to your weary bones, you begin to wonder why such a place even exists in this rugged, untamed world. Why here, on this muddy stretch of road between nowhere and somewhere, does a rough-hewn shelter stand against the relentless wind? Pull your cloak a little tighter, let the distant howl of the night settle into your ears, and step closer to the fire's warmth, as we unravel the purpose of these inns in a fragmented medieval landscape. You walk along a path that's more suggestion than certainty, where the earth is churned by hooves and boots, and the horizon offers no promise of safety. In this age, travel isn't a choice made lightly. It's a gamble with fate. Whether you're a merchant hauling wool to market, a pilgrim seeking absolution at a distant shrine, or a messenger bearing news that could shift the balance of power, the world beyond the village is a patchwork of petty kingdoms and baronial lands, each with its own rules, tolls, and lurking dangers. A day's journey might take you through a forest thick with bandits, or across a river swollen with rain, and nightfall is a curtain that falls too soon. You can't simply pitch a tent in the open. The cold bites deeper than any wolf's teeth, and the shadows hold threats no prayer can ward off. So, where do you turn when the sun dips low and your legs ache with the miles? You seek an inn, a humble beacon in a world that feels like it's always on the brink of unraveling. Imagine the scent of damp wood and stale straw as you push open the heavy door, the creak of hinges echoing like a reluctant welcome. Your boots scuff against a floor that hasn't seen a broom in weeks, and the air carries the faint tang of sour ale and roasted mutton. An inn isn't just a roof over your head. It's a fragile promise of rest in a time when nothing is guaranteed. These places are often little more than converted barns or widened roadside huts, propped up by necessity rather than grandeur. Yet, to you, they're a fortress against the dark. They stand where roads converge, where the paths of weary souls cross, offering a chance to breathe before the next stretch of uncertainty. You can almost hear the sigh of relief from those who've stumbled in before you. Their muddy footprints a silent testament to the shared need for shelter. Now, let's be honest. Calling these places inns might be a bit generous, don't you think? Some are so ramshackle you half expect the walls to collapse if you sneeze too loudly. But in a world where a warm corner and a crust of bread are luxuries, you're not exactly in a position to complain. And let's not forget the innkeeper's knack for overcharging. Oh, they'll smile as they take your last coin for a bed that is more splinters than comfort. Still, you hand over the copper because what's the alternative? Sleeping under a hedge with one eye open for wolves or worse? I suppose you could say inns are the medieval equivalent of a budget motel. Barely functional, slightly dodgy, but better than the curb. Historically, these inns began to dot the European landscape more prominently from the 12th century onward, as trade routes expanded and pilgrimage became a defining feature of medieval life. The rise of commerce and religious devotion meant more feet on the roads, and with them, a growing need for places to rest. Monasteries often provided shelter for pilgrims, but not everyone was on a holy quest, and not every monk was thrilled to host a grubby merchant with a cart full of questionable goods. Inns filled that gap, springing up as private enterprises to serve the motley crowd of travelers who needed a bed, or at least a dry spot on the floor. But here is a quirky little tidbit to chew on as you huddle by the fire. Some inns were rumoured to double as unofficial post offices of their day. Travellers would leave messages scratched into the wooden beams or tucked under a loose stone, hoping another passerby might carry the word to its destination. Imagine scrawling a desperate note to your kin, entrusting it to the next stranger who stumbles through the door. It's a fragile kind of hope, isn't it? A whisper passed from one tired hand to another, with no guarantee it'll ever reach its mark. And yet, not everyone agrees on the true role of these inns in medieval society. Scholars still debate whether they were primarily economic ventures or social necessities. Some argue that inns were little more than opportunistic businesses, exploiting the vulnerable with inflated prices and questionable hospitality. Others insist they were vital cogs in a fragmented world, stitching together communities by providing a space where news, trade, and culture could mingle, however briefly. Were they predators or protectors? As you sit here, listening to the crackle of the fire and the murmur of voices in the corner, you might wonder if they were both, offering a hand to lift you up, but only after checking your purse. Feel the weight of that question settle over you like a worn blanket. Take a moment to reflect on this. What would drive someone to build a refuge in such a harsh, uncertain time? Was it kindness, or merely the lure of a profit? The truth, as always, seems to shimmer just out of reach, like the faint glow of dawn beyond the inn's shuttered windows. You can almost taste the grit of the road still on your tongue, mingled with the smoky warmth of the hearth. The inn creaks around you, its walls holding stories of countless others who've sought shelter here. It's not just a stop on your journey, it's a tiny rebellion against the chaos outside, a stubborn stand against the night. You glance at the other travellers slumped over their bowls of thin stew, their faces etched with the same exhaustion you feel. Each of them, like you, is here because the road demanded it. An inn isn't a destination. It's a pause, a breath, a momentary shield. But in this world of fractured loyalties and endless wanderings, even a pause can feel like a small miracle. You shift on the hard bench, the ache in your back a quiet reminder of the miles behind and ahead. The inn's purpose isn't to make you forget the journey. It's to remind you that for now, you've found a place to lay down your burden, however briefly. So, as the fire pops and the wind rattles the door, let your thoughts drift. Imagine the hands that built this place, the hopes and fears that linger in its cracks. An inn is more than timber and thatch. It's a witness to the human need to keep moving, to keep seeking, even when the path is unkind. You're part of that story now, a fleeting shadow in a long line of wanderers. And as sleep begins to tug at your eyelids, you might wonder if this humble shelter holds more wisdom about the world than any castle or cathedral ever could. Rest here a while, traveller. The road will wait, at least until the first light of morning. As you linger in the dim glow of the inn, the weight of the road still clinging to your weary frame, your gaze shifts to the figure standing behind a rough-hewn counter near the hearth. This is the innkeeper, the heart and soul of this creaking haven. a person whose presence seems to hold the very walls together. You step closer, the scent of damp wood and simmering broth curling around you, and you can't help but wonder who truly runs these shadowed refugees in a world so fragmented and uncertain. Let's ease into their domain, shall we? Settle in. Let your mind wander as we explore the Innkeeper's world, their burdens, their secrets, with a voice as soft as the crackle of the fire. You notice the Innkeeper's hands first, calloused, stained with the day's labor, moving with a practiced rhythm as they wipe a chipped wooden mug with a rag that has seen better days. Their face, weathered like the stone walls outside, carries a story in every line, every furrow. Are they a man or a woman? It's hard to say at first glance in the flickering light, and honestly, it hardly matters. In this age, survival trumps all, and the role of innkeeper falls to whoever can bear its weight. You catch their eye for a moment, and there's a sharpness there, a quiet calculation. Are you a weary pilgrim or a troublemaker with a blade hidden under your cloak? They've seen both, and they've learned to read the difference in the slump of a shoulder, the weight of a sigh. Imagine standing in their boots for a day. You're not just a host offering a straw mattress and a crust of bread. You're a gatekeeper, a spy, a makeshift healer when the nearest physician is a week's ride away. Your inn is a tiny kingdom, and you, its reluctant ruler. The air around you hums with the clatter of tin plates, the low murmur of travelers bartering for a corner to sleep, and the ever-present creak of the floorboards underfoot. You've got to keep the peace when tempers flare over the last spoonful of watery stew, and you've got to keep your wits when a stranger-ass smile doesn't quite reach their eyes. It's a balancing act, and one wrong step could mean a brawl, or worse. You chuckle softly to yourself, thinking, well, at least the innkeeper's got job security. Everyone needs a roof, even if it leaks. Let's drift a little deeper into their world. You see, historically, innkeepers in medieval Europe weren't always born to the trade. Many stumbled into it, inheriting a crumbling building from a relative or turning a family home into a stopover when coin grew scarce. A well-known fact whispers through the ages. By the 14th century, inns were often licensed by local authorities, or even the crown in places like England, a way to keep tabs on who was sheltering whom in a time when rebellion simmered just beneath the surface. You can almost feel the weight of that parchment, the scratch of a quill binding an innkeeper to the law, their little outpost now a cog in a larger machine. But not everything about them fits so neatly into the history books. There's a quirky little tidbit that lingers in the margins of time. Some innkeepers, especially in rural corners of France, were rumoured to double as matchmakers. Picture it, you're nursing a mug of weak ale, your boots caked with mud, and suddenly the innkeeper sidles up with a sly grin, whispering about a merchantess daughter in the next village who's looking for a sturdy pair of hands. You can't help but smirk at the thought. Talk about full-service hospitality. Was it meddling or just good business? Who's to say? And yet, beneath the surface of their daily grind, there's a debate that scholars still murmur over in dusty halls. Were innkeepers truly the neutral caretakers of the road, or were they often complicit in the darker undercurrents of their trade? Some argue they turned a blind eye to smuggling or harboured fugitives for the right price, their inns serving as nodes in a shadowy network. Others insist they were mostly honest folk, caught between survival and suspicion in a world where trust was a rare currency. As you stand there, watching the innkeeper tally a traveller's debt on a notched stick, you wonder where their loyalties truly lie. Are they a friend to the weary, or just another player in a game of secrets? Take a moment to reflect on this. Let the question hang in the smoky air. The sensory weight of their domain presses against you now. You smell the sharp tang of vinegar as they scrub a spill from the counter, a futile battle against the grime of countless hands. You hear the rasp of their voice, low and gravelly, as they haggle with a merchant over the price of a night's rest, their tone equal parts weary and unyielding. The warmth of the fire barely reaches this corner, and you notice the chill seeping through their patched woolen tunic. Do they ever rest themselves, or are they bound to this place as surely as the iron hinges on the door? It's a life of constant vigilance, isn't it? You almost laugh under your breath thinking, imagine being the medieval equivalent of a 24/7 convenience store clerk, except your customers might rob you, or worse, snore loud enough to wake the dead. And speaking of the dead, you can help but notice the small talisman dangling from a cord around the Innkeeper's neck. A tiny cross, or perhaps something older, a charm against the spirits that travelers swear linger in places like this. Superstition clings to these walls as thickly as the soot, and you wonder if they have ever seen something in the dead of night that made their blood run cold. Do they whisper prayers when they lock the doors? Or do they scoff at such nonsense, hardened by years of facing down the unknown? You lean against the counter, the wood rough under your palm, and let your mind drift to the stories they must carry. Tales of lost souls, of deals struck in the dark, of laughter shared over a flickering candle. Their role, you realize, isn't just to provide shelter. It's to hold space for the human condition in all its messy glory. You watch as they break up a minor squabble between two pilgrims, their voice firm but not unkind, and you think about how they've likely seen every shade of desperation and hope. They're a confessor without a cassock, a judge without a gavel, and, let's be honest, a bit of a gossip when the mood strikes. You grin sleepily at the thought of them spinning a yarn about the knight who swore his horse spoke Latin after too much ale. It's probably not true, but in a place like this, truth is just another guest passing through. So, as you stand in the innkeeper's domain, the firelight casting long shadows across their worn face, you feel the weight of their world settle over you like a threadbare blanket. It's not a glamorous life, nor an easy one, but it's vital, isn't it? They are the keepers of the crossroads, the silent witnesses to 1,000 journeys. And as the night deepens, as the chatter of the common room fades to a dull hum, you can't help but feel a quiet respect for them. They stand guard over this fragile sanctuary, and in doing so, they hold a piece of the medieval world together. One traveller, one story, one leaky roof at a time. Let your thoughts linger here in the warmth of their quiet strength, as the inn's heartbeat slows to match your own. As you linger in the shadowy presence of the innkeeper, a figure of both authority and quiet menace in this roadside refuge, your gaze begins to wander beyond their weathered frame. The walls around you seem to whisper with the weight of centuries, and you step forward, drawn to the very bones of this place. You walk slowly, your boots scuffing against the uneven floor, the air thick with the scent of old wood and damp stone. This medieval inn, this temporary haven carved out of a harsh and unforgiving world, is more than just a shelter. It's a testament to human endurance, a structure of grit and necessity, pieced together from the raw materials of the earth. Let's explore the architecture of these places, shall we? Settle in. Let your mind wander with me as we trace the outlines of stone and timber that hold these stories together. Imagine yourself standing at the threshold of this inn, somewhere along a muddy track in 14th century England. The building looms before you, squat and sturdy, as if it grew out of the ground itself, rather than being built by human hands. The walls are rough-hewn stone at the base, likely quarried from nearby hills, their surfaces pocked and uneven, slick with moss that clings like a whispered secret. Above, the upper stories, if there are any, lean slightly, constructed from timber frames that creak under the weight of time and weather. You can almost hear the groan of those beams, can't you? They've borne witness to storms and sieges, to travelers' laughter and quiet despair. The roof, a patchwork of thatch, or perhaps crude wooden shingles if the innkeeper's purse allowed, sags in places, as though it's tired of holding up the sky. It's not exactly the Ritz, but then again, in a world where a dry corner is a luxury, this might as well be a palace. As you step closer, you notice the windows, or rather the lack of them. Small, narrow slits pierce the walls, more for defense than for light, often covered with oiled parchment or thin animal hide, if glass is too dear. The wind sneaks through these gaps, a low whistle that carries the chill of the outside world into the inn's fragile warmth. You can feel it now, that draft brushing against your neck, a reminder that comfort here is a fleeting thing. Inside, the floors are packed earth or rough wooden planks, uneven and worn smooth by countless boots. The air smells of smoke and dampness, a heavy, earthy tang that clings to your clothes. Every surface seems to hum with the memory of hands that built it, hands that knew survival depended on getting these walls just right. Now, let's talk about the layout, because, frankly, it's a bit of a mess. You wander through the space, and it's clear there's no grand architectural plan here. Medieval inns weren't designed by some visionary with a blueprint. They were slapped together out of necessity, often growing haphazardly as more travelers came knocking. The main room, where the hearth glows like a weary heart, is the core of it all. But beyond that, you might find a warren of smaller chambers or lofts, accessed by rickety ladders that look like they've got a personal grudge against you. Honestly, climbing one feels like a gamble with fate. Will you make it to the top? Or will you end up as the inn's next ghost story? And don't even get me started on the stables out back. They're often just as much a part of the inn as the building itself. A ramshackle lean-to where your horse gets better accommodations than you do. Lucky beast. But let's pause for a historical anchor amid all this rustic chaos. It's well documented that many inns of the medieval period, especially in England, were built along key pilgrimage routes or near market towns. Take, for instance, the fact that by the late Middle Ages, places like the Southwark Inns near London, immortalised later by Chaucer in his Canterbury Tales, were strategically placed to catch weary pilgrims heading to shrines like Canterbury. These locations weren't random, they were economic lifelines, their architecture shaped by the need to house as many bodies as possible, often at the expense of comfort or elegance. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That behind every crooked beam, there's a calculation of profit and survival. And speaking of quirks, here's a little tidbit to tickle your fancy as you stand in this drafty space. Did you know that some medieval inns were rumoured to have hidden trapdoors or secret passages? Not for romantic intrigue, but for more practical reasons? Smugglers, thieves, or even innkeepers with a side hustle might use these to stash goods or unwanted guests out of sight. Imagine stumbling across one now, your foot catching on a loose board, revealing a dark void beneath. Would you dare to look closer, or would you pretend you saw nothing, as most sensible folk might? Yet not all is settled about these structures. Even among those who've studied them for decades, there's a quiet debate among historians about just how uniform inn architecture truly was across medieval Europe. Some argue that regional differences, stone-heavy builds in mountainous areas versus timber frames in forested regions, reflect not just available materials, but also cultural priorities. Others insist that inns were more standardized, especially those tied to monastic or royal oversight, following a rough template of functionality over flair. It's a subtle disagreement, but it invites a deeper question. How much of what we build, even now, is shaped by the land and the stories we tell about it? Take a moment to reflect on this. Let the thoughts settle like dust in the dim light of this ancient room. As you stand here, running your fingers along the rough edge of a timber beam, you can't help but feel the weight of it all. This inn isn't just stone and wood. It's a fragile barrier against the wilderness outside. A place where the line between safety and danger is as thin as the parchment over those windows. You catch a whiff of straw from somewhere nearby, mingled with the faint, sour tang of spilled ale soaked into the floor. Somewhere, a beam creaks as if in agreement with your thoughts, and you smile faintly. It's not much to look at, this patchwork shelter. If modern building inspectors showed up, they'd probably faint on the spot, or slap the innkeeper with a fine so hefty it'd bankrupt a king. But in its time, this was enough. More than enough. It was a roof, a fire, a fleeting promise of rest in a world that offered little. So as you linger in this space, feeling the cold seep through the walls and the history seep into your bones, you start to notice something else. Above the door, weathered by rain and the touch of countless hands, there's a signboard swaying gently in the breeze. It's more than just a marker, it's a story in itself, a silent call to anyone passing by. Shall we step outside for a closer look? Let the creak of that sign draw us into its tale. For now, Let the inn's architecture hold you a little longer, its imperfections a quiet lullaby as you drift deeper into the past. As you step away from the rough-hewn walls and timber beams that frame this medieval inn, your gaze is drawn upward, toward a weathered signboard swaying gently in the evening breeze. It creaks on its rusty chain, a quiet groan that seems to whisper secrets of countless travelers who've paused beneath it. The air carries the faint scent of damp wood and the distant tang of smoke from the inner's hearth. And as you squint to make out the faded paint on the board, you can almost feel the weight of history etched into its surface. This is no mere marker. It's a silent herald, a beacon in a world where roads are uncertain and nightfall brings danger. You're standing at the threshold of a story told not in words, but in symbols and scratches. In the crude art of a time when literacy was a luxury few could claim. Picture yourself as one of those weary souls trudging along a muddy track, your boots caked with the earth of a long day's journey. The sun dips low, casting golden streaks across the rolling hills, but the shadows grow long and hungry. You've heard tales of brigands lurking in the woods, of wolves with eyes that glint like embers. And then there it is, a signboard jutting out over the path like an outstretched hand. It's not just a marker of shelter, it's a promise of safety, or at least the illusion of it. The image painted on it might be a crudely drawn stag, a crowned lion, or perhaps a simple red bush, a nod to the old tradition of hanging a bundle of evergreen to signal a tavern. You don't need to read to understand. In a world where most can't decipher a single letter, these signs speak a universal language, pulling you in with the silent assurance of a roof over your head. Take a moment to imagine the innkeeper, or perhaps his overworked servant, climbing a rickety ladder to hoist this sign each morning. The paint is peeling, the wood splintered from endless seasons of rain and frost, yet it stands proud. There's a certain charm in its imperfection, isn't there? It's as if the sign itself has traveled as far as you have, bearing the scars of time. And let's be honest, if you were an innkeeper in the 14th century, you'd probably slap on the brightest, gaudiest colors you could afford just to catch the eye of some poor sod who's too tired to notice he's about to overpay for a bowl of watery stew. A little medieval marketing, if you will, because even back then, they knew how to sell a dream. But these signboards are more than just clever advertisements. They're a lifeline in a fractured world. Historically, we know that by the late Middle Ages, inns became increasingly vital as trade routes expanded and pilgrimage grew into a cultural cornerstone. The reign of Edward III in England, for instance, saw a surge in travel as merchants, and holy wanderers crisscrossed the land, and inns sprang up like mushrooms after rain to meet the demand. These signs weren't just decor, they were often the only way to distinguish one ramshackle establishment from another in a landscape dotted with unnamed roads. You might stumble upon the Swan or the Boar's Head, names that stick in your mind like burrs on a cloak, guiding you back if you're lucky enough to pass this way again. And here, as a quirky little tidbit to chew on as you stand beneath that creaking board, some inn signs were so iconic that they doubled as local landmarks. Travelers would give directions not by street or mile, but by the sign itself. "Meet me at the Green Dragon," they'd say, as if the painted beast could breathe fire and guard the crossroads. It's a reminder of how small the world once felt, how a single image could anchor an entire community's sense of place. You can almost hear the clatter of hooves and the murmur of voices as folk gather beneath it, swapping tales of the road while the wind tugs at the sign's fraying edges. Yet, not everything about these signs is as quaint as it seems. There's a scholarly debate that simmers quietly among historians about their origins and meanings. Some argue that many inn signs, especially those depicting animals or heraldic symbols, were tied to the patronage of local lords or guilds, a way to flaunt loyalty or protection in an age when power was everything. Others insist they were purely practical, chosen at random by innkeepers with no deeper intent than to stand out. As you trace the chipped outline of a painted crown with your eyes, you can't help but wonder, is this a mark of fealty or just some innkeeper's half-hearted attempt at looking fancy? The truth, like so much of history, remains shrouded in the mist of time, leaving you to ponder the stories this signboard refuses to tell. Now, let's linger here a bit longer, under the shadow of this silent sentinel. The wood is rough beneath your fingertips, as you imagine reaching out to steady it against the wind. You can smell the faint bitterness of old paint, mixed with the earthy dampness of the evening air. Somewhere nearby a horse snorts, and the distant clink of a tankard echoes from within the inn. These signs, for all their simplicity, carry a certain magic, don't they? They are a threshold between the wild uncertainty of the road and the fleeting comfort of a strangeress hearth. And if we're being honest, they're probably also a subtle warning. Because let's face it, that charming little painting of a smiling boar might just be hiding the fact that the beds inside are crawling with more critters than the forest you just escaped. But there's another layer to this, a softer one. As you stand here, the last light of day catching the signboard's faded edges, you can't help but feel a flicker of connection to those who've come before. How many hands have pointed to this very sign in relief? How many eyes have searched for it through the gloom? It's a humble thing, yet it holds the weight of countless journeys, each one as fleeting as the breeze that stirs it now. And speaking of fleeting, if you think deciphering a medieval signboard is tough, just wait until you try haggling with the innkeeper over the price of a straw mattress. Spoiler, you're probably going to lose that battle, my friend. So, as the twilight deepens and the signboard sways above you like a tired old friend, take a moment to reflect on this. What does it mean to be drawn in by something so simple, yet so vital? In a world of endless wandering, these signs are more than markers. They're a quiet promise that, for tonight at least, you've found a place to rest. The inn awaits, its door just a few steps beyond, and with it, the hum of voices and the flicker of firelight. You adjust your cloak, feeling the weight of the day settle into your bones, and let the signboard's tale linger in your mind as you move forward, ready to cross the threshold into the warmth beyond. As you linger by the weathered signboard, its creaking wood swaying in the evening breeze, you feel the pull of the inn's warmth drawing you closer. You push open the heavy oak door, its iron hinges groaning like an old man reluctant to rise, and step into the common room, the beating heart of this medieval haven. The air hits you first, a thick tapestry of scents that tells tales of countless travelers. There's the sharp tang of wood smoke curling from the massive hearth at the room's center, mingling with the earthy musk of damp wool cloaks drying near the fire. Underneath it all, a faint whiff of stew, something hearty, perhaps mutton or barley, simmers in a blackened pot, teasing your hunger after a long day on the road. The room hums with life, a chaotic symphony of voices, laughter, and the clink of pewter mugs. Yet there's a strange intimacy to it, as if this space, for all its noise, wraps you in a weary traveller's embrace. You find a spot near the hearth, the warmth seeping into your bones as you settle onto a rough-hewn bench. The firelight dances across the faces around you, casting long shadows on the soot-stained walls. This common room is no mere place to eat or drink. It's a crucible where lives collide, where the boundaries of class and custom blur in the flickering glow. You glance around, taking in the crowd. There's a merchant in a fine but travel-worn tunic, his fingers drumming on the table as he haggles over some deal in hushed tones. Beside him, a pilgrim, his staff propped against the wall, mutters prayers under his breath, perhaps seeking divine protection for the journey ahead. And over in the corner, a pair of labourers, their hands calloused and their laughter loud, swap tales of the fields, probably exaggerating just a bit to impress the serving girl who rolls her eyes as she passes. You can't help but smirk at the thought, some things never change, do they? Even in this medieval chaos, the art of trying to catch a glance or a giggle is as old as the hills. The hearth itself is a marvel, a gaping maw of stone that seems to swallow the cold and spit out comfort. It's the anchor of the room, the reason you and every other soul here have braved muddy roads and aching feet to reach this place. Historically, these hearths were more than just a source of heat. They were a lifeline in an era when winters could kill as surely as a bandit's blade. Records from the 14th century, like those in English manor accounts, show that inns often burn through staggering amounts of firewood, sometimes a small forest's worth in a single season, just to keep the chill at bay for travellers like you. As you stretch your hands toward the flames, feeling the prickling heat against your skin, you realize how much this simple glow means. It's not just warmth, it's survival, a fragile barrier against the dark and the damp that waits outside. But not everything about this common room is so noble or poetic. You notice a peculiar detail as you shift on the bench, a faint carving in the wood beneath your fingers, a crude little sketch of a pig wearing a crown. You chuckle softly, wondering if some cheeky traveller left this as a jab at a local lord, or maybe just to pass the time. It's a quirky reminder that inns were canvases for the mundane as much as the momentous, small acts of rebellion or whimsy etched into the very bones of the place. Who knows how many hands have touched this same spot, how many quiet laughs it's drawn over the years. As you sit there, soaking in the clamour and the comfort, your mind wanders to the debates that still simmer among historians about these very spaces. Some scholars argue that common rooms like this were early crucibles of democracy, places where ideas and grievances could be aired freely among strangers, far from the watchful eyes of lords or clergy. Others counter that such notions are romantic at best. Most talk here, they say, was likely about the price of grain or the ache in one's back, not grand notions of liberty. You ponder this as you watch a grizzled old man in the corner gesture wildly, spinning some tale to a rapt audience. Is he planting seeds of rebellion, or just complaining about the inn's watery ale? Perhaps it's a bit of both. Take a moment to reflect on this. What would you say if these walls could hear your thoughts? Would your words spark change, or simply fade into the smoke? The noise swells again, pulling you back to the moment. A bard, or at least someone pretending to be one, strums a lute in the far corner, his voice warbling through a tune about a knight and a maiden that is frankly more comical than romantic. You stifle a laugh as he hits a particularly sour note, sounding less like a lovelorn hero and more like a cat caught in a storm. It's endearing, though, in its own clumsy way. And you notice a few others grinning too, their faces softened by the shared absurdity. Not far from the bard, a group of card players huddles over a scarred table, their game interrupted by a sudden shout. Someone's caught cheating, or so they claim. The accused throws up his hands, swearing innocence with such dramatic flair that you half expect him to audition for the bard's next ballad. Honestly, if these walls could talk, they'd probably just sigh at the sheer amount of nonsense they've witnessed. The serving girl weaves through the crowd again, balancing a tray of mugs with a practiced ease that belies the chaos around her. Her apron is stained with ale and stew, her brow furrowed as she dodges a particularly enthusiastic storyteller's flailing arms. You catch the scent of the bread she carries, coarse, dark, and slightly burnt, but after a day of nothing but dust and hunger, it might as well be a feast fit for a king. The taste of the air shifts as she passes, a mix of yeast and ash that grounds you in this moment, in this rough, raucous sanctuary. Every creak of the floorboards, every burst of laughter or grumbled curse weaves into a tapestry of human messiness. A reminder that, for all the hardship of the road, there's something almost sacred in this shared space. You lean back against the wall, the cool stone a contrast to the fire's heat, and let your gaze drift upward. The ceiling is low, blackened by years of smoke, and you can just make out the shapes of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, their faint aroma cutting through the heavier smells. It's a small detail, but it speaks to the care, or at least the practicality, of whoever runs this place. They know that a sprig of lavender or rosemary can mask the less pleasant odours of a room packed with unwashed travellers. You smile to yourself, imagining the innkeeper's quiet pride in such tricks of the trade, even if the guests are too busy arguing or drinking to notice. As the evening deepens, the common room's energy shifts subtly. Voices grow softer, though no less animated, and the fire's crackle seems louder in the lulls. You feel the weight of the day settling over you, a gentle heaviness in your limbs, but there's no rush to move just yet. This space, For all its imperfections, its sticky tables, its questionable tunes, its endless bickering, holds you in a kind of spell. It's a place where the world outside, with its dangers and uncertainties, can be forgotten, if only for a few hours. So you stay, letting the warmth and the stories wash over you, knowing that soon enough, the road will call again. But for now, you're here, in the heart of the inn, where every whisper and every laugh is a thread in the endless weave of human connection. As you linger by the hearth in the common room, the warmth of the fire seeping into your bones, the air around you hums with the murmur of voices. The scent of damp wool and smoky wood mixes with the faint tang of spilled ale, wrapping you in the raw, unpolished essence of this medieval inn. You shift on the rough bench, feeling the uneven grain beneath you, and let your gaze wander over the crowd. This isn't just a place to rest your weary legs. It's a living tapestry of strangers, each thread woven with stories, secrets, and the dust of distant roads. You're not alone here, not by a long shot. And as the evening deepens, you begin to notice the peculiar dance of human connection unfolding before you. You watch a merchant in a fur-trimmed cloak, his hands gesturing wildly as he barters with a local farmer over the price of grain. His voice carries a sharp edge, but there's a glint of amusement in his eye, as if he knows he's playing a game he's bound to win. Nearby, a weary pilgrim clutches a wooden cross, murmuring prayers under his breath, his eyes darting nervously at every loud laugh or sudden movement. You can almost smell the fear on him, mingled with the earthy musk of weeks on the road. Then there's the bard in the corner, strumming a lute with fingers stained by ink or berry juice, his sly grin suggesting he's already crafting a ballad about the very people in this room. You can't help but wonder if you will end up as a hapless fool in his rhyme, perhaps the traveller who snored so loud the rafters shook. A soft chuckle escapes you at the thought. After all, these inns are as much theatres as they are shelters, and you're both actor and audience tonight. The diversity of this crowd strikes you as you sip from a chipped wooden mug, the bitter ale stinging your tongue. There are men and women of every station here, from the rough-handed labourers nursing their aches to the occasional noble passing through, their fine cloaks brushed clean of mud, but not of arrogance. You notice how the nobleman's servant hovers nearby, quick to refill his master's cup, while casting longing glances at the dice game unfolding at a nearby table. It's a fleeting moment of humanity, a reminder that even in this rigid world of rank and title, an inn's walls can blur those lines, if only for a night. Historically, we know that inns like this were vital hubs in medieval Europe, especially after the 12th century, when the growth of trade routes and pilgrimages, like those to Canterbury or Santiago de Compostela, made travel more common. These places weren't just rest stops. They were melting pots where a peasant might share a bench with a knight, even if the conversation was more grunt than poetry. But it's not all lofty connections and shared humanity, is it? You catch a whiff of something sour as a man stumbles past, his breath reeking of too much drink and too little care. Some of these guests are downright questionable, their eyes shifty, their hands too quick near unattended packs. You pull your own belongings a little closer, half amused at your own suspicion. After all, who's to say you don't look just as dubious to them, with your travel-worn cloak and weary slump? It's a bit of a medieval standoff, isn't it? Everyone sizing up everyone else, wondering if the person snoring beside them tonight might lift their purse by morning. You smirk to yourself, imagining a sign above the door that reads, "Rest at your own risk, and keep one eye open." Then there's the oddity of the company itself. You overhear a snippet of conversation about a traveller who claims to have seen a two-headed calf on the road to York. A sure omen of doom, he insists, though his companion just laughs and calls for another round. It's a quirky little tidbit, the kind of tale that only seems to sprout in places like this, where exhaustion and ale loosen tongues. You can almost picture the calf now, one head mooing mournfully while the other chews cud, oblivious to its own strangeness. It's nonsense, of course, but in the flickering light of the fire, with the wind howling outside, you find yourself half believing it, if only for the sake of a good story. As you listen to the ebb and flow of voices, you start to notice the patterns of interaction, the unspoken rules of this temporary society. There's a gruff camaraderie among the regulars, a nod or a grunted greeting that marks them as part of the inn's rhythm. But for newcomers like you, there's a subtle test, a weighing of your worth in glances and silences. You feel it when a grizzled old man squints at you from across the room, as if deciding whether you're worth a tale or a warning. It's not hostility exactly, but a kind of guarded curiosity, a reminder that trust is a rare coin in a place where everyone's just passing through. Scholars still debate how much social mixing actually happened in medieval inns. Some argue these spaces were egalitarian, a rare leveling ground in a hierarchical age, while others insist that class divisions persisted even here, with nobles often demanding private rooms or better fare. You can see both sides as you watch the nobleman's servants scurry about, clearly separate yet still part of the same smoky chaos. You lean back against the wall, the cool stone grounding you as the noise of the room washes over you like a slow tide. There's a woman with a face lined by years of toil, telling a story of a lost love to anyone who'll listen, her voice cracking with a sorrow that feels too real for this crowded space. A young boy, barely old enough to carry a tray, darts between tables, dodging elbows and curses, with a practiced ease that makes you wince. You catch his eye for a moment, and he offers a shy grin before disappearing into the fray. It's these small, fleeting connections that linger with you, the kind that remind you how fragile and fleeting this gathering is. By morning, most of these faces will be gone, scattered back to their roads and destinies, leaving only echoes of laughter or whispered confidences behind. And yet, isn't there something almost sacred in this impermanence? You let the thoughts settle over you like a soft blanket, your eyelids growing heavy with the warmth and the drone of voices. These strangers, with their quirks and burdens, are bound together for just a night, sharing a space that smells of sweat and stew, of life in all its messy glory. You imagine the inn as a kind of confession booth, where stories spill out not to a priest, but to whoever happens to be near enough to hear. Maybe that's the true magic of this place, not the creaking beams or the watery ale, but the way it holds so many lives in its embrace, if only for a few hours. Take a moment to reflect on this. Imagine yourself as one of these travelers, your own story mingling with theirs. What would you share if the firelight and a stranger's ear were all the invitation you needed? As the night stretches on, you feel the weight of your own journey pressing against the clamor around you, a quiet reminder that you too are just passing through. The inn holds you for now, but the road waits, and with it, the next chapter of your tale. As you linger in the smoky haze of the common room, surrounded by the murmur of strangers and the crackle of the hearth, a new scent begins to weave its way through the air. It's earthy, a little sour, and faintly spiced, a promise of sustenance that draws your attention toward a low doorway at the far end of the room. You rise, your boots scuffing softly against the uneven floor, and make your way toward the source of this humble allure. The inn's table awaits, and with it, a meal that is less a feast and more a quiet act of survival. Settle in, let your shoulders ease, and imagine the simple fare of a medieval inn unfolding before you. You duck beneath the lintel and find yourself in a smaller space, a kind of kitchen or serving area where the air is warmer, thicker with the steam of boiling pots. A long, scarred wooden table stretches before you, its surface bearing the marks of countless meals, countless hands. The innkeeper's wife, or perhaps a harried servant, bustles about with a wooden ladle in hand, her face flushed from the heat of a fire that glows in a cavernous hearth nearby. You catch the sharp tang of vinegar, the heavy warmth of barley, and the faint, greasy scent of meat. If you're lucky, your stomach rumbles, not out of excitement, but out of sheer necessity. This isn't a place for culinary delights. It's a place to fill the void after a long day on muddy, perilous roads. You sit on a rough bench, its edges smoothed by years of weary travelers just like you, and a bowl is set before you with a dull thud. It's a pottage, of course. a stew that's more broth than substance, a murky blend of whatever the inn has on hand, cabbage, turnips, a few shriveled peas, and if the stars align, a scrap of salted pork or mutton floating like a weary island in the sea of grey. You dip a chunk of coarse bread into the mix, its crust hard enough to double as a weapon. Honestly, you could probably fend off a bandit with this loaf if push came to shove. The bread softens just enough to chew, though, and the pottage, bland as it is, warms you from the inside out. It's not a meal to savour, it's a meal to endure. A reminder that survival often tastes like compromise. But let's not be too harsh on this humble fare. After all, you're not dining at a king's banquet, and truth be told, you're grateful for anything that doesn't come straight from a roadside ditch. You glance around and notice a fellow traveller grimacing at his own bowl, muttering something about swill fit for pigs. You can't help but smirk. Maybe it is. But at least it's hot swill. And in a world where hunger is a constant shadow, that's a small victory. Another bite, another sip of watery broth, and you start to wonder what kind of alchemy turns a handful of scraps into something that keeps body and soul together. There's a strange poetry in it, isn't there? A meal born of necessity, yet it ties you to every other soul who sat at this very table, spoon in hand, chasing the same fleeting warmth. Historically speaking, you're eating what most medieval folk would have eaten, whether at home or on the road. Pottage was the staple of the common diet across Europe from the 9th to the 15th centuries, a one-pot meal that stretched meagre resources to feed as many mouths as possible. It wasn't glamorous, but it was practical, often cooked in large cauldrons over an open fire, much like the one simmering a few feet away from you now. The recipe, if you can call it that, varied by region and season, but the principle was always the same. Use what you've got and make it last. As you scrape the bottom of your bowl, you can almost feel the weight of that history, the countless hands that stirred similar pots, the quiet resilience baked into every watery spoonful. Now, here is a quirky little tidbit to chew on alongside your bread. Some medieval inns were known to reuse their pottage cauldrons for weeks, even months, without ever fully cleaning them out. They just keep adding water, vegetables, and whatever bits of meat they could scrounge, creating a kind of perpetual stew. Imagine that, a pot with a memory, each meal layered with the ghosts of meals past. It's both fascinating and mildly horrifying, like realizing your soup might be older than the inn itself. You glance at your empty bowl with a raised eyebrow, half wondering if you've just eaten a relic. Ah well, what's a little ancient flavor among friends? The food at an inn like this wasn't just about sustenance, though. It was a social contract, a quiet test of trust. You can't help but notice the innkeeper eyeing the room, making sure no one S pilfering an extra crust or sneaking a ladleful when no one S looking. And who could blame them? Resources are scarce and every morsel counts. Scholars still debate the quality of inn fare and whether travellers were routinely overcharged for subpar meals. Some argue that inns, especially in more remote areas, exploited weary pilgrims and merchants, serving watered-down stews or stale bread at inflated prices. Others counter that innkeepers were often just as strapped as their guests, doing their best with limited means in a world where famine was never far off. As you push your bowl aside, you ponder this question. Were you just fed, or were you fleeced? There's no clear answer, only the lingering taste of barley and doubt on your tongue. You lean back against the wall, the rough stone cool against your shoulder, and let the warmth of the meal settle into your bones. The room hums with the low chatter of other travellers, the clink of wooden spoons, the hiss of steam from the pot. Somewhere nearby, a dog, probably the inn's unofficial guard, snuffs at the floor, hoping for a dropped scrap. You chuckle softly to yourself. That mutt's got the right idea, scavenging for treasure in a place like this. Maybe you should take notes. The thought fades as your eyelids grow heavy, the day's journey catching up with you in the quiet heat of this cramped little space. But there's more to come, more to taste, more to uncover. For now, though, you let the moment linger, the simple act of eating grounding you in a world that feels both ancient and fleeting. Take a moment to reflect on this. Imagine yourself here, at this table, surrounded by the ghosts of travelers past. What does this meal tell you about their lives, their struggles, their small, stubborn hopes? The pottage may be gone, but its story lingers, a quiet echo of necessity and endurance. And as you sit here, half dozing in the dim light, you can't help but wonder what else this inn has to offer. A drink, perhaps. Something to wash down the grit of the road and loosen the tongue. The thought stirs you just enough to keep your eyes open, to keep listening to the whispers of this old, weary place. As the last echoes of clinking wooden plates and hearty laughter from the meal fade into the smoky air of the common room, you find yourself drawn to a smaller, more shadowed corner of the inn. Here, the air carries a different weight, a yeasty tang that tickles your nose and promises something both comforting and dangerous. You ease yourself onto a rough-hewn bench, the wood creaking softly beneath you, as a serving lad with a smudge of soot on his cheek slides a chipped clay mug across the table. It's ale, of course, dark, frothy, and smelling faintly of barley and something you can't quite place, like damp earth after rain. You wrap your hands around the cool mug, feeling the uneven glaze under your fingertips, and let the warmth of the room settle into your bones. This is where the real pulse of the inn lives, in the quiet clinks of mugs and the murmured secrets that spill over with every sip. You take a cautious first taste, and the ale hits your tongue with a sharpness that's almost a slap, followed by a bitter warmth that lingers. It's not the refined brew you might dream of in some far-off noble's hall, but out here on the muddy roads of medieval Europe, it's a small miracle. Ale isn't just a drink in a place like this. It's a necessity, a safer bet than the questionable water drawn from a nearby stream. In fact, historical records remind us that in the Middle Ages, ale was often consumed more than water, brewed in vast quantities by households and inns alike to avoid the diseases that lurked in unboiled wells. You can almost taste the practicality in every gulp, a silent agreement between traveller and innkeeper that survival sometimes comes in a mug. But there's more to this dark liquid than mere sustenance. You glance around, noticing how the other patrons, merchants with furrowed brows, pilgrims with weary eyes, even a local farmer with mud still caked on his boots, lean closer to each other with every drink. The ale loosens tongues, and the inn becomes a confessional of sorts. You hear a merchant mutter about a rival's shady dealings in the next town over, his voice low but urgent, as if the ale itself is urging him to spill the tale. Over in the corner, a young man with a lute, half forgotten in his lap, slurs a story about a ghostly rider he swears he saw on the road last night. You can't help but smirk. Ghosts, bandits, or just too much of this very ale. The line between truth and tavern talk blurs as easily as the flickering candlelight on the walls. And oh, the walls themselves seem to soak up these stories. You imagine them holding on to centuries of whispered plans and half-baked schemes, the kind that only come out when the mug is nearly empty. There's a quirky little detail you might not expect, though. Some inns, especially in the more superstitious corners of England, would bury a small jug of ale beneath the threshold during construction, a quiet offering to ward off ill spirits or bad luck. You picture the innkeeper, years ago, solemnly tucking that jug into the earth, muttering a prayer or a curse under his breath. Did it work? Well, you're still here, aren't you? Sipping away without a ghost in sight, or so you hope. You take another slow sip, letting the warmth spread through your chest, and you cannot help but chuckle softly at the thought of yourself as some grand medieval detective, piecing together mysteries from ale-soaked gossip. What's the worst secret you might overhear tonight? A stolen kiss behind the stables? A plot to overcharge the next band of pilgrims for stale bread? Or maybe, just maybe, you'll stumble upon a real conspiracy. If only your head wasn't starting to feel as heavy as this mug. It's a gentle jest, but you wonder if the innkeeper waters down the ale just to keep fools like you from getting too rowdy. Not that you'd blame him. A brawl in a place like this would be less a fight and more a clumsy dance of spilled drinks and bruised egos. The ale's magic works on you too, though, doesn't it? You feel your shoulders loosen, the ache of the day's travel melting into the background hum of voices. It's as if the drink is a key, unlocking not just stories, but a kind of camaraderie that only exists in places like this, where strangers become fleeting friends under the weight of shared exhaustion. You notice the innkeeper now, a stout man with a beard like tangled brambles, pouring another round from a barrel behind the counter. His eyes catch yours for a moment, and there's a knowing glint there, as if he's seen 1,000 travelers just like you, each one thinking they're the first to unravel the inn's secrets over a pint. Yet, beneath this cozy haze, there's a question that scholars still wrestle with, a debate that simmers as quietly as the ale in your mug. Was the medieval inn truly a place of respite and connection, fueled by drink and shared stories? Or was it a more calculated enterprise, where ale was just another tool to keep guests spending and lingering longer than they intended? Some historians argue that innkeepers, often portrayed as jovial hosts, were shrewd businessmen who knew the value of a strong brew in keeping their coffers full. Others insist that the culture of ale drinking in these spaces was a genuine social glue, binding communities together in an era of isolation and hardship. You ponder this as you swirl the last dregs in your mug, feeling the grainy texture of sediment against the clay. Were you lured into another round by cunning, or by the simple need for warmth on a cold night? Perhaps it's both, a dance of commerce and companionship as old as the inn itself. You lean back against the wall now, the rough stone cool against your back, and let the sounds of the room wash over you. The clink of mugs, the low rumble of laughter, the occasional hiccup from a fellow who had one too many. It adds a symphony of small, human moments. The ale has done its work, dulling the sharp edges of the day, wrapping you in a sleepy haze that feels like a soft blanket. You catch yourself smiling at nothing in particular, maybe at the thought of that poor farmer over there still trying to convince anyone who'll listen that his cow once spoke to him after a night of this very brew. It's a silly notion, but in this flickering, half-dreaming light, you almost want to believe him. Take a moment to reflect on this. How many secrets have been spilled in rooms like this, carried away on the breath of ale and forgotten by morning? How many bonds, however fleeting, have been forged over a shared drink in the dim glow of a medieval inn? You feel the weight of history in every sip, a quiet connection to those who sat here before you, their laughter and whispers lingering in the air like the faint aftertaste of barley on your tongue. And as your eyelids grow heavier, you wonder what stories you might tell tomorrow, or what secrets this inn might coax from you before the night is through. As the last drops of ale settle in your mug, and the murmur of voices in the common room begins to fade into a drowsy hum, you feel the weight of the day pulling at your limbs. The innkeeper, with a grunt and a nod, gestures toward a narrow staircase at the back of the room. It creaks ominously underfoot as you make your way up, the flickering light of a single tallow candle casting long, wavering shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The air grows cooler here, carrying the faint mustiness of old straw and damp wood, a reminder that comfort in a medieval inn is more of a suggestion than a promise. You're about to discover what rest truly means in a place like this, and well, let S just say it, as not exactly a 5-star experience waiting for you at the top of these groaning steps. You reach the upper landing, where the scent of unwashed wool and the faint tang of smoke linger like uninvited guests. The sleeping arrangements in a medieval inn are a far cry from the plush beds of your imagination. If you're lucky, and let's be honest, luck isn't exactly your traveling companion today, you might snag a spot in a shared chamber. These rooms, often little more than cramped lofts above the common area, are stuffed with travelers of all sorts. You shuffle past a snoring merchant, his boots still on, and a pilgrim muttering prayers under his breath, clutching a worn wooden cross. The straw mattresses, if you can call them that, are thin and lumpy, scattered across the floor like forgotten thoughts. They're stuffed with whatever the innkeeper could scrounge: hay, dried leaves, sometimes even moss if the harvest was poor. You gingerly lower yourself onto one, feeling the sharp prickle of straw through the threadbare blanket. It's less a bed and more a test of endurance, but after a day of trudging through mud and misery, Even this feels like a small mercy. If you're not so fortunate, or if the inn is bursting at the seams with weary souls, you might find yourself relegated to the common room downstairs. There, you curl up near the dying embers of the hearth, the hard-packed earth floor beneath you, offering all the warmth of a winter's night. You wrap your cloak tighter, trying to ignore the snores, the rustling, and the occasional scurry of something small and unwelcome in the shadows. Privacy. Oh, that's a luxury reserved for lords and their gilded manners. Here, you're shoulder to shoulder with strangers, each breath a shared secret, each grunt a story of exhaustion. It's almost comical, isn't it, how the idea of personal space hasn't quite made it to the medieval itinerary. You might as well cozy up and ask the fellow next to you for his life story. After all, you're practically family now, whether you like it or not. And then there's the bedding itself, or the lack thereof. If the innkeeper is feeling generous, you might get a coarse woolen blanket, likely shared with a few others, and carrying the unmistakable aroma of its previous occupants. If not, you make do with your own cloak or whatever scraps of fabric you've brought along. Fleas and lice, those tiny medieval roommates, are almost guaranteed to join you for the night. You scratch at an itch behind your ear, half wondering if it's just your imagination, or if something's already taken up residence. It's a bit of a gamble, really. Will you wake up with more companions than you started with? Let's hope you've got a good sense of humor about these things, because squashing bugs might just be your midnight entertainment. Historically, we know that medieval inns varied widely in their accommodations, largely depending on their location and clientele. Records from the 14th century, particularly in England, show that larger inns near major trade routes or pilgrimage paths often had designated sleeping chambers, sometimes even with rudimentary beds for wealthier travellers. These were the exception rather than the rule, though. Most inns catered to the common folk, and their sleeping arrangements reflected that harsh practicality. You're not exactly staying at the medieval equivalent of a roadside motel. This is more like crashing on a friend's questionable couch, except the friend is a gruff innkeeper who might overcharge you for the privilege. Now here is a quirky little tidbit to chew on as you try to get comfortable. Some inns, especially in colder regions, would heat large stones in the fire and wrap them in cloth to serve as makeshift bed warmers. Imagine that. A toasty rock as your only defense against the creeping chill of a drafty loft. It's almost sweet, in a rugged, medieval kind of way, until you roll over and accidentally kick it off the mattress. Ouch. Better hope your toes survive the encounter. There's also a bit of scholarly debate around how safe or restful these sleeping arrangements truly were. Some historians argue that the communal nature of inn sleeping fostered a sense of camaraderie among travellers, a forced intimacy that broke down social barriers in an otherwise rigidly hierarchical world. Others counter that this setup was a breeding ground for mistrust and petty theft, with weary travellers clutching their belongings even as they slept. Who's right? Well, as you lie there on your prickly straw pallet, listening to the heavy breathing of the stranger mere inches from your face, you might lean toward the latter. Trust doesn't it come easy when your purse is your pillow, and every creak in the night could be a hand reaching for it. The sounds of the inn settle around you like a tattered blanket of their own. From below, the faint clink of a mug being set down, the low murmur of a late-night conversation. Up here, the rustle of bodies shifting on straw, the occasional cough or groan punctuating the stillness. The air is thick with the day's lingering smells, roasted barley from the ale, the sour tang of sweat, the earthy dampness of the walls. You close your eyes, trying to block it all out, but sleep is a shy visitor in a place like this. Every now and then, a draught sneaks through a crack in the wall, brushing against your cheek like a cold whisper. You pull your cloak higher, wondering if dawn will come as a relief or just another weary mile on the road. Take a moment to reflect on this. What does rest mean in a world where even sleep feels like a battle? Here, in the dim, crowded loft of a medieval inn, you're not just wrestling with discomfort, but with the very idea of vulnerability. To close your eyes is to trust, however briefly, that the world won't turn against you in the dark. And yet, despite the fleas, the snores, The ever-present threat of a misplaced elbow from your neighbor. There's a strange poetry in this shared struggle. You're all here, together, seeking the same elusive thing, a moment of peace in a restless age. So, as you lie there, counting the creaks of the ancient timbers above, let your mind wander. Imagine the countless others who've rested in this very spot over the decades, their dreams and fears as fleeting as the candlelight that's long since burned out. Perhaps sleep will come, or perhaps it won't. Either way, you're part of something ancient, something raw and human. And isn't that, in its own peculiar way, a kind of rest? Let the night carry you where it will, traveller. Tomorrow's road awaits, whether you're ready or not. As you lie there, in the dim, flickering light of the inn's chamber, the straw beneath you prickling through the thin blanket, your mind wanders to the practicalities of this fleeting sanctuary. You've found a place to rest your weary bones, but rest doesn't come free in this medieval world. You shift slightly, the creak of the wooden bed frame blending with the distant murmur of voices from the common room below, and you can help but wonder, what does it cost to claim a nighter's shelter in a place like this? Let's drift into that question together, as the candlelight wavers and the night deepens around you. You imagine yourself rising from this makeshift bed, your boots scuffing against the rough floorboards as you make your way back downstairs. The innkeeper, a stout figure with a face carved by years of hard bargains, stands behind a scarred wooden counter, eyeing you with a mix of curiosity and caution. You've already eaten your fill of coarse bread and watery stew, and perhaps you've nursed a mug of ale that tasted more like regret than refreshment. Now, it's time to settle the score. You reach into the leather pouch at your waist, feeling the weight of a few coins, perhaps all you have left after days on the road. But coin isn't the only currency in a place like this. Oh no, the medieval inn is a realm of bartering, of favours, of promises whispered over a smoky hearth. You might offer a silver penny if you're lucky enough to carry one, or you might find yourself trading a worn cloak, a spare dagger, or even a story worth its weight in gold to an innkeeper hungry for news. The air down here still carries the scent of damp wool and spilled ale, mingled with the faint, acrid tang of tallow candles burning low. You can almost feel the innkeeper's gaze weighing your worth as much as your purse. It's a dance of sorts, this negotiation. A night's lodging, a meal, a spot by the fire. None of it comes without a price, and that price is as varied as the travellers who pass through these doors. If your coin is scarce, you might offer to chop wood at dawn, your hands already aching at the thought of the splintered axe handle. Or perhaps you'll pledge to mend a broken stool, though you're no craftsman, and the innkeeper knows it. There's a quiet humour in the way he raises an eyebrow at your clumsy offer, as if to say, well, I've seen worse deals struck under this roof. You can't help but smirk back. After all, in a world where a good night's sleep is a luxury, you'll take any bargain you can get. Let's linger on that thought for a moment. The cost of rest wasn't always measured in cold, hard metal. Historical records, like those from the 14th century in England, tell us that innkeepers often kept detailed accounts of what travellers owed, sometimes extending credit to regulars or those with a trustworthy face. A single night might cost you the equivalent of a day's wages for a labourer, perhaps a penny or two if you're staying somewhere modest. But that's assuming you're dealing with coin at all. More often, especially in rural inns far from the bustling trade towns, you're trading goods or labour, your worth tied to what you can offer in the moment. It's a curious system, isn't it? One that binds you to this place, even if just for a day, making you part of its rhythm whether you like it or not. And then there's the quirky little detail that might surprise you as you stand there, haggling over the price of a straw pallet. Did you know that some innkeepers, particularly in parts of medieval France, were known to accept livestock as payment? Imagine that, handing over a scrawny chicken or a bleating goat just to secure a corner of the common room for the night. You can almost hear the squawk of feathers, and the innkeeper as gruff chuckle as he sizes up your feathered offering, muttering something about how it'll make a better stew than a bedmate. It's a strange image, isn't it? But in a world where coin is scarce for many, a chicken might just be your ticket to a roof over your head. Yet, not everything about this transaction is so straightforward. You sense a tension in the air, a flicker of unease as you count out your payment or promise your labor. Scholars still debate the fairness of these medieval exchanges, with some arguing that innkeepers often exploited desperate travelers, charging exorbitant rates or demanding more than a stay was worth. Others suggest that many innkeepers operated with a rough sort of honor, knowing that a reputation for fairness would draw more weary souls to their door. As you stand there, the innkeeper's stern face softening just a fraction, you wonder which side of that debate holds true in this particular inn. Is this a haven of fairness, or are you merely another mark in a long line of fleeced wanderers? The question hangs in the smoky air, unanswered, as you hand over what you owe. There's a certain irony in all this, isn't there? You've travelled miles, faced mud-soaked roads, and the ever-present threat of brigands, only to find that the true test of survival might just be negotiating with a man who smells of onions and suspicion. You might even let out a quiet laugh at the thought, picturing yourself as some grand adventurer reduced to bartering over a bowl of gruel. And yet there is a second jest to be found in the absurdity of it all. Imagine the innkeeper S. Ledger. If he keeps one filled with scribbles of one night for a chicken or bedding for a ballad, it's almost comical, the idea of your journey being reduced to such mundane transactions, as if the epic tales of your travels could be summed up in a butcher's bill. But let's not dwell too long on the humour. There's a deeper layer to this exchange, a quiet reflection on what value means in a world so raw and unpolished. As you finalise your payment, whether with a coin, a promise, or a reluctant handshake, you're not just buying rest, you're buying a moment of safety, a brief reprieve from the uncertainty of the road. The innkeeper, for all his gruffness, is your gatekeeper to that fleeting peace. And isn't there something profound in that? The way a handful of coppers or a muttered favour can stand between you and the cold, unforgiving night. Take a moment to reflect on this. Imagine the weight of those coins in your palm, the roughness of their edges, the stories they might tell if they could speak. Each one a tiny piece of a larger world, a world where rest is never guaranteed, where every night under a roof is a small victory. You feel the innkeeper's eyes on you still, but there is no malice there now, just the quiet understanding of two souls navigating the same harsh reality. You turn away, ready to climb the creaking stairs back to your bed, the transaction complete. But the weight of it lingers, doesn't it? The cost of rest, in coin or otherwise, is more than just a number. It's a reminder of how fragile comfort is, how dearly bought each moment of stillness can be. And so, as you settle back onto that prickly straw, the distant sounds of the inn fading into a sleepy hum, you carry that thought with you. The cost of rest isn't to just what you've paid. It is what you've given up, what you've risked, what you've promised to make it through another night. Let that sink in as the candle burns lower, casting long shadows across the room. There's more to this inn than meets the eye, more dangers and whispers waiting in the dark. But for now, you've paid your due. Rest, if you can, while the night holds its breath around you. As the last of your meagre coins clink into the innkeeper's weathered palm, you feel the weight of the day's journey lift, if only for a moment. The promise of rest beckons, but as the flickering light of the common room fades behind you, and the creak of the wooden stairs echoes beneath your boots, a subtle unease begins to stir. You've secured a place to lay your head, but in this medieval inn, nestled somewhere between civilization and the wild unknown, rest comes with a shadow. The night stretches ahead, and with it, a quiet reminder that safety is never quite guaranteed in these walls of timber and stone. You tread softly down the narrow hallway, the air thick with the scent of damp straw and the faint lingering tang of spilled ale from below. The walls seem to lean in close, as if they've borne witness to secrets they're unwilling to share. Every groan of the floorboards beneath your feet feels like a warning, a whisper from the past that not all who have stayed here, left with their burdens, lightened. You can help but wonder who or what might be lurking just beyond the thin partition of your room. After all, in a world where the road itself is a gamble, an inn is less a sanctuary and more a roll of the dice. You push open the door to your sleeping quarters, if you can call it that. It's little more than a corner of shared space, A straw pallet shoved against the wall with a threadbare blanket that's seen better days, probably better centuries. The air is stale, heavy with the musk of unwashed travellers and the faint, acrid bite of smoke that's seeped into every crack. You settle onto the pallet, the straw crunching beneath you, like the bones of some forgotten dream. Somewhere nearby, a fellow traveller snores with the rhythm of a war drum, and you can't help but smirk. Sleep? Good luck with that. It's like trying to nap during a jousting tournament, minus the cheering crowd. But it's not just the noise that keeps your eyes open, staring into the dimness. There's a deeper unease, one that prickles at the back of your neck. Inns like this, in the heart of the medieval world, were as much a magnet for danger as they were for weary souls. You've heard the tales. Everyone has. Stories of bandits slipping in under the guise of travellers, their cloaks hiding daggers instead of dust from the road, or worse, innkeepers themselves, less hospitable than they seem, who might lighten your purse or your life while you dream. It's not just paranoia, it's practicality. In a time when law was as distant as the next town, trust was a currency few could afford to spend. And let's not forget the more mundane threats. You shift on the pallet, feeling something scurry beneath the straw. A rat, no doubt, or something with more legs than you'd care to count. You mutter under your breath, half a prayer, half a curse. If the bandits don't get you, the bedbugs surely will. It's almost comical, isn't it? You've survived muddy roads, aching feet, and the constant threat of highwaymen, only to wage war against an army of tiny, bloodthirsty critters. If there's a medal for valor in a medieval inn, you're earning it bite by itchy bite. Yet, for all the jests, the danger was real enough to etch itself into history. Take, for instance, the well-documented accounts from the 14th century, when inns along major pilgrimage routes became notorious for harbouring thieves. Records from the time, sparse as they are, speak of travellers disappearing without a trace, their belongings mysteriously claimed by the very establishments meant to shelter them. The road to Canterbury wasn't just a spiritual journey, it was a gauntlet, and the inn was often the final test. But not all the risks were so grim or violent. There's a peculiar little tidbit that floats through the annals of medieval lore, one that might make you chuckle even as you pull that tattered blanket tighter. Some inns, it's said, had a curious custom of tying a bell to the foot of a sleeping guest, ostensibly to wake them if they wandered in their sleep, but more likely to alert the innkeeper if someone tried to slip away without paying. Imagine that, rolling over in the night, only to set off a jingle that brands you a thief before you've even opened your eyes. Talk about a wake-up call. Still, the shadows of this place aren't just woven from tales of bandits or quirky customs. There's a deeper debate that lingers in the minds of those who study these forgotten havens, a question that even now, as you lie in the dark, feels oddly relevant. Scholars have long argued over whether medieval inns were truly places of danger, or if their reputation was inflated by the fears of a superstitious age. Some point to the lack of concrete evidence. Few written complaints survive, after all, in an era when most couldn't read or write. Others counter that the silence itself is telling. In a world where survival often meant keeping quiet, who would dare speak out against the only shelter for miles? As you listen to the wind howl outside, rattling the ill-fitted shutters, you can't help but ponder where the truth lies. Were these inns dens of peril, or merely mirrors of a world already brimming with uncertainty? Take a moment to reflect on this. Imagine yourself here, in this very room centuries ago. The same creaking timbers, the same restless night. What would you fear most? The stranger snoring beside you, whose intentions are as hidden as the moon behind the clouds? Or the innkeeper downstairs, whose smile never quite reached his eyes? Or perhaps it's the road itself, waiting just beyond the door, indifferent to whether you wake at all. The medieval inn was a microcosm of its time, a place where trust and suspicion danced an uneasy waltz, where every shadow held a story, and not all of them ended well. You draw a slow breath, the chill of the room settling into your bones. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks, sharp and sudden, slicing through the stillness. Your hand instinctively rests near the small bundle of belongings at your side, your only tether to the life you've left behind on the road. Sleep feels like a distant shore, one you might never reach tonight. But that's the bargain of the inn, isn't it? A roof over your head, a fire to warm your hands, and a gamble with the unknown. You close your eyes, if only for a moment, and let the sounds of the night weave their own tale. The snores, the wind, the faint scurry of unseen things, they're all part of this strange, fleeting refuge. And as you drift, or try to, you can't help but smile faintly at the absurdity of it all. Here you are, in a medieval inn, surrounded by dangers both real and imagined. And yet, there's a kind of poetry in it. It's like signing up for a haunted house tour, except the ghosts are just poorly paid servants, and the scares come with a side of questionable stew. If nothing else, you've got a story to tell. If you make it to morning, that is. For now, though, the night holds its breath, and so do you, waiting to see what the darkness will reveal. As the flicker of the hearth in the common room begins to dim, casting long shadows across the worn wooden tables, you find yourself drawn away from the clatter of mugs and the murmur of weary voices. You step toward a quieter corner of the inn, near a narrow window where the cool night air seeps through the cracks, carrying whispers of the world beyond these walls. Here, in this medieval refuge, you start to notice something deeper about this place. It's not just a shelter, not merely a spot to rest your aching bones. No, this inn is a crossroads, a pulsing heart of trade, news and gossip, where the threads of distant lives weave together under one sagging roof. You settle onto a rough-hewn bench, the wood creaking beneath you, and let your gaze drift to the innkeeper behind his counter. He's a burly man, wiping a chipped mug with a rag that's seen better days, but his eyes are sharp, darting from one guest to another. He's not just pouring ale or tallying coins, he's listening, always listening. You can almost smell the intrigue in the air, a faint tang of secrets mingling with the scent of damp wool and stale bread. This inn, you realize, is more than a stop on your journey. It's a living map of the medieval world, each traveler a pin marking routes of commerce, conflict, and whispered tales. Imagine yourself as a merchant, your pack heavy with bolts of coarse linen, bartering not just goods, but information. You lean toward a fellow traveler, a wiry man with a sun-weathered face, and lower your voice. Heard the wool prices dropped in York, you mutter, watching his reaction. He nods, then counters with news of a bandit raid on the southern road. Your trade depends on such tidbits, scraps of truth or rumor that could save your cargo or your neck. Here at the inn, deals are struck over watery stew, and alliances form as quickly as a candle burns down to its stub. It's a marketplace of words, and you're right in the thick of it. Let's not pretend it's all high stakes and grand schemes, though. Sometimes, the gossip is as mundane as the mud on your boots. You overhear a plump woman with a flour-dusted apron complaining about her neighbor's cow wandering into her garden. Again, "If that beast chews one more cabbage, I'll turn it into stew myself," she grumbles, and you can't help but smirk. Then there's the lad by the fire, spinning a yarn about a three-legged dog that supposedly predicts storms. You raise an eyebrow, half amused, half asleep, wondering if anyone actually believes him. And don't get me started on the old man who swears the king's tax collector is hiding in the next village as a baker. Honestly, if that's true, he's needing more than dough. These little sparks of chatter, absurd as they might be, are the lifeblood of the inn, stitching strangers into a fleeting community. Take a moment to reflect on this. How often do you find yourself in a place where every word, every glance, carries the weight of a wider world? Here, in this cramped, smoky room, you're not just passing through. You're part of a web, a fragile network of knowledge that could shift with a single rumor. Historically, inns like this were vital hubs in the medieval landscape, especially during the 12th and 13th centuries, when travel exploded with the growth of pilgrimage routes and market towns. A well-known fact anchors us here. The rise of the wool trade in England turned many an inn into a de facto trading post, where merchants exchanged not just goods, but critical updates on prices and politics. These places weren't merely for resting, they were where the economic pulse of a region could be felt. thumping through every conversation. But there's a quirkier side to this crossroads, one that might make you chuckle as you sip your watered-down ale. Did you know that some inns were rumoured to have secret codes scratched into their walls or tables? A little nick here, a crude arrow there, supposedly guiding smugglers or thieves to safe routes or hidden stashes. Whether it's true or just the fancy of a drunken storyteller, you can't help but squint at the nearest beam, wondering if there's a message you're missing. It's the kind of oddity that makes you question how much of history is written in ink and how much is carved in shadow. Scholars, of course, don't always agree on the role inns played in spreading information. There is a quiet debate among historians about whether these establishments were genuine engines of news or simply echo chambers for exaggeration and lies. Some argue that inns, with their mix of locals and transients, were essential for disseminating royal decrees or warnings of plague, acting almost like medieval newsrooms. Others caution that the tales told here were often as reliable as a broken cartwheel, warped by superstition or personal grudges. As you listen to the hum of voices around you, you wonder which side holds more truth. Are you hearing the raw pulse of the times, or just the tall tales of tired men? The sensory weight of this place presses in now. You feel the grit of the floor beneath your feet, the faint stickiness of spilled ale on the table's edge. The air is thick with the musk of unwashed bodies and the sharp bite of burning tallow from a nearby candle. Somewhere a man coughs, a deep rattling sound, while another hums a tuneless melody under his breath. Outside, the wind howls softly, rattling the shutter, as if the world itself is trying to join the conversation. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the cacophony wash over you. This inn, this crossroads, is chaotic, yet comforting, a place where the boundaries between stranger and kin blur, if only for a night. You start to notice how every person here carries a fragment of somewhere else. That woman with the patched cloak. Her accent hints at a coastal village, her hands stained with the blue of woad dye. The man with the scarred cheek, his dagger tucked close, speaks of battles far to the north. Even the innkeeper, gruff as he is, mutters about a letter from a cousin in a distant city, bearing news of a new lord's harsh taxes. You're not just at a stopover, you're at the intersection of 100 paths, each story a thread pulling you into a tapestry you can't quite see in full. And isn't that the quiet magic of a place like this? You come seeking shelter, a crust of bread, a straw mattress if you're lucky. But what you find is a mirror of the world, fractured and flawed, reflected in the faces and words of those around you. Here, trade isn't just about coin or cloth. It's about the exchange of fears, hopes, and half-truths. News isn't written in parchment. It's breathed into being over flickering flames. Gossip isn't idle. It's the currency of survival. So, as the night deepens and the voices grow softer, you lean back against the wall, the rough stone cool against your shoulder. You let yourself drift, carried by the undercurrent of this crossroads. What will you hear next? A merchant's warning of a blocked pass? A pilgrim's tale of a miracle at a distant shrine? Or perhaps just another complaint about that pesky cow? Whatever it is, you're here, at the heart of it all, where the medieval world turns, one whispered word at a time. As you linger in the smoky warmth of the inn's common room, the hum of conversation weaving through the air like a threadbare tapestry, your thoughts drift to the deeper currents that shape this place. You notice a small wooden cross hanging above the hearth, its edges worn smooth by time and the passing touch of countless hands. It's a quiet reminder of a presence that looms larger than any innkeeper, larger even than the raucous travellers crowding the benches. You're stepping into the shadow of faith now, into the unspoken pact between the church and these humble shelters along the road. Take a moment to feel the weight of that influence, the way it seeps into the very beams of this creaking structure. You walk closer to the hearth, the heat prickling against your skin, and you cannot help but imagine the church as a silent partner in this inn's existence. It's no secret that faith governed much of medieval life, a compass for the lost and a rod for the wayward. Historically, The church played a direct role in the world of travel. Monasteries and abbeys often provided shelter for pilgrims and wanderers, setting a precedent for hospitality that secular inns like this one couldn't ignore. You can almost hear the echo of Gregorian chants in the distance, a ghostly soundtrack to the clinking of mugs and the murmur of tired voices. The church didn't just offer beds, it offered a moral framework, a sense of divine oversight that made a night's rest feel less like a gamble and more like a blessing. But let's not get too pious just yet. You glance around and notice a small carved figure tucked into a corner shelf. A crude little saint, or maybe an angel, watching over the room with a chipped, lopsided grin. It is probably there to ward off any mischief, or at least to make the innkeeper feel better about overcharging for that watery stew. You smirk to yourself, wondering if the saint gets a cut of the profits for its trouble. The church's influence wasn't always so lofty and spiritual after all. Many inns, especially those near pilgrimage routes, bore religious names. Think the Sign of the Cross or St. Mary's Rest, as a kind of marketing ploy, a way to lure in the devout or the superstitious. You can just picture some weary pilgrim trudging through the mud, spotting a sign with a halo painted on it, and thinking, well, surely the Lord wouldn't let me get robbed here. Oh, sweet innocence. You settle onto a rough-hewn bench, the wood cool beneath you, and let the scent of damp wool and sour ale wash over you. It's a strange thought, isn't it? How faith and commerce tangled together in places like this. Inns often served as extensions of the church's reach, a place where clergy might stop on their journeys, where tithes or donations could be collected under the guise of a friendly chat over bread. You imagine a stern-faced monk sitting right where you are now, his robes brushing the dusty floor, scribbling down the sins of the inn's patrons in some invisible ledger. But it wasn't all dour sermons and guilt trips. The church also encouraged charity, and some innkeepers, whether out of genuine piety or just good business sense, offered a free bowl of pottage to the poorest travellers, a nod to Christian kindness. You can almost taste it now, that thin, gritty broth, warmed by the fire and maybe by a flicker of goodwill. Yet, as you gaze into the flickering flames, you can't shake the sense of something heavier beneath the surface. There's a scholarly debate that simmers even now, centuries later, about just how deep the church's control over inns really ran. Some historians argue that the church wielded immense power, dictating everything from the prices charged to the moral conduct of guests. Think of it as a medieval Yelp review written in Latin, with excommunication as the ultimate one-star rating. Others, though, suggest the influence was more symbolic, a veneer of sanctity over a rough-and-tumble world where innkeepers were more concerned with coin than commandments. You ponder this as the fire crackles, the shadows dancing across the walls like whispered arguments. Was this inn a true outpost of faith, or just a clever disguise for the same old human messiness? You stretch your legs, feeling the ache of a long day's journey in your bones, and your eyes catch a quirky detail, a faded inscription scratched into the wall near the door. It reads something like Sanctus Protegat, which you guess means, may the saint protect, though your Latin is as rusty as an old horseshoe. It's a tiny, odd relic of the inn's devotion, or maybe just a drunken doodle by some long-forgotten traveller. Either way, it makes you wonder about the little rituals that must have played out here. Did the innkeeper mutter a prayer before opening the doors each morning? Did guests cross themselves as they entered, hoping to ward off bedbugs and bandits alike? You chuckle softly at the thought of a holy war against fleas, imagining a priest solemnly blessing a straw mattress while the inn's cat looks on, unimpressed. The air grows heavier now, the din of the room fading into a low hum as night deepens. You can smell the faint tang of wax from a single candle burning low on a nearby table, its light trembling as if it too feels the weight of unseen eyes. Faith in a place like this isn't just about grand cathedrals or sacred relics. It's in the small, quiet moments, in the hope that something greater watches over you as you sleep in a stranger's house. But let's be honest, you muse with a sleepy grin. If the church's protection couldn't stop the innkeeper from watering down the ale, what chance did it have against the rats in the cellar? It's a cynical thought, but it is hard to resist when you, re-surrounded by the creak of timber and the faint, ever-present scent of damp straw, you lean back, letting the warmth of the hearth seep into you, and consider how faith must have felt to those who passed through here. For a medieval traveller, the world was a tapestry of the divine and the dangerous, every shadow a potential demon, every kindness a miracle. An inn, with its cross above the fire and its whispered prayers, offered a fragile sanctuary, a place where the church's promise of salvation might just hold the darkness at bay. But as you listen to the wind howling outside, rattling the shutters like a restless spirit, you can't help but wonder if that promise was enough. Did the travellers who slept here dream of angels, or did they wake to the same old fears, the same old cold? Take a moment to reflect on this as the fire burns low and the room grows still. Imagine yourself as one of those wanderers, carrying the weight of your sins and your hopes, seeking shelter under a roof blessed by faith yet shadowed by doubt. The church's influence is all around you, in the carvings, in the names, in the very air you breathe. But so too is the raw, unpolished humanity of this place. And as you sit here, wrapped in the quiet of the night, you realize that perhaps that is the true mystery of the medieval inn, not whether faith could protect it, but whether it needed to. For in the end, it's the warmth of the fire, the shared laughter, and even the watered-down ale that make this rough shelter feel, for a fleeting moment, like home. As you linger in the smoky haze of the medieval inn, the weight of the day's journey still clinging to your weary bones, you begin to notice the peculiar rhythms of this place. The influence of the church, which you felt in the murmured prayers before supper and the cross etched above the doorway, fades into the background now. Something stranger, more ancient, seems to weave through the air. A tapestry of customs and whispers that defy the rigid doctrines you've come to expect. You settle onto a creaking wooden bench by the fire, the warmth licking at your chilled hands, and let your gaze wander. The inn, it seems, is a world of its own, governed by quirks and superstitions that hum beneath the surface of every interaction. You notice first the faint scent of dried herbs, not from the stew that simmers in the cauldron, but from small bundles tied above the doorframe. They sway gently as a draught creeps in, their brittle leaves rustling like a secret being shared. An old woman, hunched and muttering, brushes past you, her gnarled fingers clutching a sprig of something green and sharp-smelling. She tucks it beneath a loose floorboard near the hearth, her eyes darting to ensure no one has seen. You raise an eyebrow, intrigued, but keep your silence. Later, you overhear her whispering to a young serving girl that it is to ward off the night wanderers, those unseen spirits who might slip through the cracks of the inn after dusk. A smile tugs at your lips. Night wanderers, indeed. Perhaps they're just the creaks of old timber. Or maybe the inn's ale has a bit more mischief in it than you thought. You shift on the bench, the rough grain of the wood biting into your back, and let your ears tune to the low murmur of voices around you. There's a custom here, one that strikes you as both odd and endearing. Before any traveller can claim a spot by the fire, they must rap thrice on the nearest table and mutter a quick word of thanks to the housekeeper, not the innkeeper, mind you, but some unseen guardian of the hearth. You watch a burly merchant, his cloak still dusted with road grit, perform this ritual with a sheepish grin, as if he's half embarrassed but unwilling to tempt fate. You can't help but chuckle softly under your breath. Imagine a man who's faced bandits on the road, trembling before an invisible housekeeper. But when your turn comes, you find yourself tapping the table anyway, the words slipping out in a whisper. Better safe than sorry, right? The inn's air grows thicker now, heavy with the scent of tallow candles and the faint tang of spilled ale. Your eyes catch on a small, peculiar mark carved into the wall near the bar, a crooked spiral, barely noticeable unless you're looking for it. You squint, leaning closer, and notice others like it, etched into beams and doorframes. A serving lad, no older than 12, notices your curiosity as he shuffles by with a tray of wooden mugs. He grins, a gap-toothed smirk, and whispers that it's a charm for good fortune. carved by the innkeeper, SS great-grandfather, after a traveller paid his tab with a golden coin instead of copper. A quirky tidbit, to be sure, but you cannot help but wonder if every scratch in this old place hides a story, or at least a clever way to dodge bad luck. You lean back, amused, and think to yourself that if luck can be carved into wood, maybe you'll scratch a little spiral of your own before you leave. But not all the customs here are so whimsical. You've heard, from dusty tomes and stern-faced scholars, that medieval inns often operated under a web of unspoken rules, some rooted in practicality, others in pure superstition. Take, for instance, the widely accepted historical fact that many inns in the 14th and 15th centuries enforced strict curfews, often locking their doors at nightfall to protect guests and themselves from the dangers of the road. Thieves and worse roamed the dark, and an innkeeper wasn't about to risk his livelihood for a latecomer. Yet, as you sit here, watching the last of the daylight fade through a warped window, you notice the door remains unbolted, a quiet defiance of that old rule. Perhaps this innkeeper trusts the charms on his walls more than a rusty lock. There's a debate among historians, one you've pondered on quiet nights like this, about whether these superstitions were mere folklore or a genuine reflection of medieval belief. Some scholars argue that rituals like herb bundling or table knocking were practical, herbs to mask foul odours, knocks to signal camaraderie, while others insist they reveal a deeper fear of the unknown, a world where the line between the mundane and the mystical blurred. You let the thought linger as you watch the firelight dance on the walls, casting shadows that almost seem to move on their own. Were these people simply practical, or did they truly believe spirits lingered in every corner? Take a moment to reflect on this. What would you believe if you lived in a world where every shadow held a story? Your musings are interrupted by a sudden clatter, a tray of mugs tipping over as a traveller stumbles through the door, his face pale as if he's seen a ghost. The room falls silent for a heartbeat, then erupts into laughter, the tension breaking like a snapped twig. You smirk, whispering to yourself that maybe he's just met one of those night wanderers the old woman warned about. The lad who spilled the mugs scrambles to clean up, muttering something about how dropping a mug means a storm's coming. You can't help but let out a quiet laugh. Oh, come now, a storm from a clumsy hand. If that's true, then every inn in Christendom must be drowning in rain by now. The fire crackles, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney, and you feel the weight of the day settle deeper into your limbs. The inn's quirks wrap around you like a threadbare blanket, odd yet comforting in their strangeness. You catch the faint whiff of those herbs again, mingled now with the earthy scent of damp wool from a traveller's cloak drying by the hearth. Somewhere in the corner, a man strums a lute, the notes soft and uneven, as if he's half asleep himself. You let your eyes half close, the sounds and smells blending into a drowsy haze. There's a rhythm to this place, isn't there? A dance of customs and beliefs that defy the cold logic of the road. You tap the table once more, just for good measure, and let your thoughts drift. Maybe there's something to these old superstitions after all. Or maybe it's just the ale talking, warming your blood and softening the edges of the world. Either way, you're content to sit here a while longer, letting the inn's strange hospitality weave its spell. The night is young, and there are still whispers to be heard, secrets to be uncovered in the flicker of the firelight. So rest, just for a moment, and let the quirks of this ancient place carry you into the quiet. As you linger in the dimly lit common room of this medieval inn, the echoes of strange customs and whispered superstitions still hang in the air, tickling your curiosity. But now, your gaze shifts, drawn to the quieter corners, the unseen hands that keep this rough-hewn haven alive. You step away from the hearth's glow, where travellers trade their tales, and slip into the shadowed edges of the inn, where the true heartbeat of this place thrums in secret. Here, in the unseen labour of servants, the story of survival unfolds. A story not of bold knights or weary pilgrims, but of those who toil in silence to ensure your rest. You walk past the creaking wooden tables, your boots scuffing against the uneven floor, and notice a young lad, no older than 12, darting between the benches. His arms are laden with chipped wooden bowls, his face smudged with soot from the fire he likely tends before dawn. He doesn't meet your eye. There's no time for that. His world is one of endless tasks, a rhythm of scrubbing, fetching, and hauling that keeps this inn from crumbling into chaos. You can almost feel the ache in his small shoulders as he scurries toward the kitchen, the scent of stale broth and damp straw trailing behind him. It's a sharp, earthy smell, grounding you in the reality of this place, where every comfort comes at someone else's expense. Behind the thin, warped door of the kitchen, you hear the clatter of pots and a woman's sharp voice barking orders over the hiss of boiling water. You imagine her hands, rough and reddened from years of scalding steam and splintered wood, as she kneads dough or stirs a cauldron of questionable stew. She's likely the innkeeper's wife, or perhaps a hired cook, but her labour is the invisible thread that stitches this place together. Without her, there'd be no meagre bread on your table, no watery ale to dull the ache of the road. And yet, her name will never be spoken by the travellers who pass through. You can't help but wonder, does she dream of a life beyond this smoky den? Or has the grind of endless days worn even her dreams to dust? As you stand there, half hidden by a sagging beam, you catch the faint scent of damp wool and exhaustion clinging to the air. It's the smell of the unseen, those who mop the spills of rowdy merchants, who empty the slop buckets at midnight, who drag straw pallets into place for strangers like you to collapse upon. These servants, often bound by debt or birth to this life, are the ghosts of the inn. They haunt the edges of your vision, slipping through doorways just as you turn your head. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't tip them even if you could. Medieval Yelp reviews went to exactly a thing, were they? A soft chuckle escapes you at the thought, though it is tinged with a quiet unease at how easily their struggles fade into the background of your own journey. You shift your weight, leaning against the cool, damp stone of the wall, and notice a girl no older than 10 sweeping the floor near the back stairs. Her broom is little more than a bundle of twigs tied to a stick, and she moves with a mechanical rhythm, as if her body has long since forgotten how to rest. Her eyes are hollow, catching the flicker of a nearby candle, and for a moment, you wonder what stories she might tell if anyone bothered to ask. Perhaps she's heard more secrets than any bard in this room, whispered by travellers as they stumble past her in the dark. But her voice, like her labour, remains unseen, unvalued. It's a bitter little irony, isn't it? The very hands that build your refuge are the ones you'll never shake in thanks. Now, let's not pretend this is all bleak poetry. There is a strange humour in the chaos of it all. Picture this, a brawny stable hand, tasked with mucking out the stalls where your weary horse rests, muttering curses under his breath as he slips on a particularly fragrant pile. You can almost hear him grumbling, "I didn't sign up for this medieval spa treatment." It's a fleeting moment of levity, but it paints a vivid picture of the gritty, unglamorous reality behind the inn's walls. These folks aren't just background noise. They're the gears that keep this creaky machine turning, even if their biggest reward is a crust of bread and a corner to sleep in. Historically, we know that medieval inns relied heavily on this unseen workforce. Records from the 14th century, particularly in England, show that many inns were family-run operations, with children and extended kin pressed into service alongside a handful of hired hands or indentured labourers. These workers often lived on the premises, squeezed into attics or outbuildings, their lives woven into the very fabric of the inn. Their labour wasn't just practical, it was survival, a way to keep the roof over their heads and the wolves of poverty at bay. But beyond the ledgers and tax rolls, their individual stories remain frustratingly out of reach, buried under centuries of dust. And then there's the quirky side of this hidden world. Did you know that in some regions, particularly in parts of medieval Germany, it was customary for inn servants to double as makeshift barbers? Imagine lying down for a trim in the back room, trusting a lad who has just spent his morning hauling pig slop to wield a rusty blade near your throat. It's the kind of multitasking that makes you grateful for modern licensing laws, doesn't it? Yet, in a world where every skill was a currency, these odd little side hustles were just another way to scrape by. Scholars, of course, don't always agree on the conditions these workers endured. Some argue that inn servants, especially in larger establishments near trade routes, might have enjoyed a degree of stability or even small perks: leftover food, a warm corner by the fire, or the occasional coin slipped by a generous traveller. Others paint a darker picture, pointing to accounts of exploitation, long hours, and harsh punishments for minor mistakes. The debate rages on in dusty university halls, with no clear answer emerging from the fragmented records of the past. What do you think? Were these hidden labourers mere cogs in a brutal system, or did they carve out quiet victories in the shadows? Take a moment to reflect on this, letting the question linger like the faint creak of the inn's ancient timbers. As you stand there, the sounds of the inn wash over you once more. The clink of tankards, the murmur of tired voices, the distant thud of a servant hauling firewood through a back door. The air is thick with the mingled scents of smoke, sweat, and something faintly sour, a reminder of the endless cycle of labour that underpins every fleeting comfort you've enjoyed here. You can almost feel the weight of their unseen hands, steadying the walls around you, even as their names slip through the cracks of history. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That the rest you found, the warmth that eases your bones, is built on the quiet sacrifices of those who'll never be remembered. So, as you turn your gaze back toward the flickering hearth, let yourself linger on this hidden world a little longer. Imagine the calloused hands that stoke that fire, the weary feet that trod these floors long before you arrived. Their labour is the silent foundation of this inn, a testament to resilience in a world that rarely offered kindness in return. And as the night deepens, as the shadows grow long, you can't help but feel a quiet gratitude for these unseen souls, whose work whispers through the ages, even if their voices do not. As the evening deepens and the clamour of the inn's common room begins to fade into a low murmur, you find yourself lingering by the hearth, the fire's embers casting a soft, flickering glow across the worn wooden tables. The air is thick with the lingering scent of barley stew and the faint musk of damp wool from travellers' cloaks. You pull your own cloak a little tighter, settling into the uneven bench, and let your gaze drift to the shadowy corners of the room. It's in moments like these, when the world outside seems to hush itself, that the true magic of the medieval inn begins to unfurl. Not in the clatter of mugs or the bartering of goods, but in the quiet spaces where stories are born. You listen as the innkeeper, a stout man with a beard like tangled brambles, wipes down a trencher with a rag that's seen better days. He mutters something under his breath about the weather turning sour, but your ears catch the faint hum of a tale being spun at the far end of the room. A grizzled pilgrim, his staff leaning against the wall like an old friend, speaks in a low, gravelly tone to a small cluster of listeners. His words weave a tapestry of wonder, a story of a knight who once stayed in this very inn, or so he claims, and left behind a cursed blade that still hums with dark intent beneath the floorboards. You can't help but smirk a little. Cursed blades under every inn. Surely, if every tale were true, you'd be tripping over enchanted relics with every step. But there's a charm in the telling, a rhythm to his voice that lulls you, pulling you into the hazy borderland between belief and dream. The inn, you realize, is more than just a place to rest your weary bones. It's a crucible for legends, a cauldron where the mundane and the miraculous simmer together over a slow fire. You can almost feel it in the air, the weight of countless stories told by countless travellers, each one leaving a trace, a whisper that clings to the smoke-stained beams above. There's the scent of pine ash from the fire, the faint tang of sour ale spilled on the floor, and the earthy undertone of straw that lines the sleeping lofts upstairs. Every creak of the timber, every sigh of the wind through the shutters, seems to carry a fragment of a tale. You wonder how many of these stories are true, how many are spun from the threads of exhaustion and ale, and how many are simply the mind's way of making sense of a world that S often too vast, too unpredictable to grasp. It's a well-known fact, of course, that inns like this one were often the beating heart of medieval communication. Before the printing press, before royal decrees could be pinned to every village square, news travelled on the lips of those who wandered, merchants, pilgrims, even the occasional outlaw seeking shelter under a false name. Chronicles from the 14th century, like those of the English monk Ranulph Hagden, note how inns served as informal hubs for spreading word of wars, plagues, and royal scandals. You imagine it now, a weary messenger stumbling through the door, his boots caked with mud, announcing the fall of a distant castle. The room would have erupted in murmurs, each listener carrying the tale a little further, adding their own flourish as they went. It's no surprise, then, that inns became the birthplace of folklore, where a simple event, a storm, a lost traveller, could morph into a legend of ghostly apparitions or divine intervention by the time it reached the next town. But not every story is so grand, and you cannot help but chuckle at some of the oddities that must have been born here. There's a quirky little tidbit, recorded in obscure tavern logs, about an inn in southern France, where travellers swore they heard a rooster crow at midnight, a sure sign, they believed, of a witch's curse. The innkeeper, ever the pragmatist, simply shrugged and said it was just a confused bird, but the tale stuck, and soon enough, pilgrims were detouring miles just to hear the bewitched rooster for themselves. You grin at the thought of it, picturing yourself lying awake upstairs, straining to hear a rogue chicken over the snoring of your fellow travellers. Honestly, between the midnight crows and the so-called cursed blades, you were starting to think medieval inns were less restful retreats and more like the original haunted houses, just without the admission fee. Yet beneath the humour and the tall tales, there's a deeper undercurrent to these stories, one that scholars still ponder over dusty manuscripts in quiet university halls. There's a debate, you see, among historians about whether inns were truly the origin of much medieval folklore, or merely the amplifiers of tales that already existed in oral traditions. Some, like the cultural historian Peter Burke, argue that inns were unique in their ability to blend the local with the foreign, creating hybrid legends as travellers from different regions swapped their myths over a shared mug of ale. Others counter that inns were simply echo chambers, reflecting stories already embedded in the collective memory of a village or shire. As you sit here, the fire's warmth seeping into your bones, you wonder which side holds more truth. Are you witnessing the birth of a new legend in the Pilgrim's tale, or merely the retelling of something ancient, polished by time and repetition? Take a moment to reflect on this. Imagine yourself as one of those travellers, your own story waiting to spill from your lips. What would you tell? Would it be a memory of a narrow escape on the road, or a dream that haunted you under a starless sky? Here, in the dim light of the inn, it feels as though anything you say could take root, could grow into something larger than yourself, carried on by the next pair of boots to tread through that door. You shift on the bench, the wood groaning softly beneath you, and let your eyes wander to the other faces illuminated by the firelight. There's a merchant with a furrowed brow, muttering about bandits on the northern road, and a young lad, barely old enough to travel alone, who listens wide-eyed to the pilgrim's tale. You can almost see the gears turning in his mind, the cursed blade becoming more real with every word. And isn't that the true power of the inn? It's a place where the boundary between reality and imagination blurs, where a simple night's rest becomes the seed of something eternal. You stifle a quiet laugh, thinking of how tomorrow that lad might tell his own version of the story, probably adding a dragon or two for good measure. Ah, the medieval equivalent of Pix, or It Didn't Happen. Except here, the proof is in the telling, not the seeing. The fire pops, sending a small shower of sparks into the air, and you feel your eyelids grow heavier. The inn is settling now, the last of the day's energy draining away into the night. But even as sleep beckons, you can shake the feeling that these walls hold more than just weary bodies and stale bread. They hold echoes of laughter, of fear, of wonder, stories that have outlived their tellers, lingering like ghosts in the rafters. You imagine yourself drifting off, the pilgrim's voice fading into a distant hum, and wonder what dreams might come in a place so steeped in the impossible. Perhaps in the quiet hours before dawn, you'll hear the whisper of a tale meant just for you, a secret passed down through centuries, waiting for the right listener to carry it forward. As the flickering light of the inn's hearth lingers in your mind, casting shadows of travelers long past, you find yourself drawn to the echoes of their voices, not just in the tales swapped over ale, but in the pages of ancient manuscripts and stories that have outlived the very walls that house them. You wander, in thought, through the narrow winding paths of medieval literature, where inns are not merely shelters, but stages for the human drama to unfold. Imagine yourself slipping through the doorway of one such tale, the air thick with the scent of old parchment and the faint must of forgotten corners. The inn is no longer just a place of rest. It becomes a crucible of fate, a crossroad of destinies penned by hands centuries gone. You walk into the world of Geoffrey Chaucer, where the Tabard Inn in Suffolk stands as a gateway to pilgrimage and poetry. It's the late 14th century, and you're among a motley crew of travellers, each with a story itching to spill from their lips as they gather for the journey to Canterbury. The inn's wooden beams creak under the weight of anticipation, the air heavy with the tang of spilled ale and the smoky haze of a fire that never seems to die. You can almost hear the host's booming voice, rallying the group with promises of a free meal for the best tale told. It is no secret that Chaucer's Canterbury Tales cemented the inn as a literary archetype, a place where the sacred and the profane collide, where knights and millers, nuns and rogues share the same worn benches. This is a historical fact, plain as day. The Tabard Inn, a real establishment in medieval London, became the launching pad for one of the greatest works of English literature, its name forever etched in the annals of storytelling. But let's linger here a moment. In the imagined clamour of that common room, you catch a whiff of something sour, perhaps the stew from last night's pot still clinging to the air, and you can't help but smile at the thought of these pilgrims arguing over who gets the last crust of bread. It's a bit like a medieval reality show, isn't it? All the drama, the backstabbing, the unlikely alliances, crammed into one smoky room before the real journey even begins. You almost expect someone to stand up and declare, "I'm not here to make friends," though of course they'd say it in Middle English, with a flourish of outdated oaths. As you settle into this literary inn, your boots scuffing against an unseen floor, you notice how these places often carry a weight beyond mere hospitality. In the romances and chansons of the era, inns are haunted by more than just weary travellers. They're the settings for clandestine meetings, forbidden loves, and whispered betrayals. Picture yourself in a dim corner, the candlelight barely reaching your face, as a knight in disguise murmurs secrets to a lady who shouldn't be there. The straw beneath your feet prickles through the thin soles of your shoes, and the damp chill of the walls seeps into your bones. Every creak of the floorboards could be a warning, or just the inn settling into its own ancient dreams. These stories paint inns as liminal spaces, thresholds between the ordinary and the extraordinary, where a simple night's rest might turn into a quest or a curse. Now, let's drift to a quirkier tidbit, something to make you raise an eyebrow as you lean back in your imaginary chair. Did you know that in some medieval texts, inns were rumoured to have magical properties? Not in the grand wizardly sense, but in small, peculiar ways, like a door that only opens for the pure of heart, or a tankard that never runs dry if you speak a certain rhyme. It's probably just the fancy of a scribe with too much ink on his hands, but it adds a shimmer of mystery to these otherwise mundane stops. You can almost imagine yourself testing the theory, muttering nonsense under your breath to see if the ale keeps flowing. Spoiler, it doesn't, but the thought alone warms you as much as the fire. Yet not all literary inns are places of wonder or camaraderie. Some are shadowed with menace, as you'll find if you leaf through the darker folk tales and ballads. You tread softly now, aware of the stories where an innkeeper's smile hides a sharper intent, where travellers vanish into the night, never to be seen again. The air grows colder as you ponder these narratives. The distant howl of wind, or is it a wolf, slipping through the cracks in the walls? Scholars still debate the symbolism of inns in medieval literature, with some arguing they represent the chaos of the world outside the ordered safety of castle or church. Are they microcosms of society, where all classes and sins mingle, or are they warnings against straying too far from the path of righteousness? It's a question with no easy answer, one that lingers like the taste of bitter ale on your tongue. Take a moment to reflect on this. What do you think an inn represents in the stories you've heard? A haven, a trap, or something in between? Let's lighten the mood before the shadows grow too long. You glance around this literary inn, noticing the exaggerated characters that seem to populate every tale. There's always that one bard in the corner, strumming a lute with questionable skill, isn't there? You half expect him to break into a medieval version of a pop song, serenading the crowd with lyrics about dragons and damsels. It's a harmless jest, but it paints a picture of how these places, in stories, are often larger than life, caricatures of the real inns you have come to know on this journey through time. And speaking of caricatures, you can't help but chuckle at the thought of medieval TripAdvisor reviews. Imagine a disgruntled merchant scribbling on parchment. 1 star for the prancing pony, bedding smelled of damp dog, and the stew was suspiciously gritty. It's a silly notion, but it reminds you that even in literature, inns are rarely perfect. They're messy, flawed, human places, just like the tales that immortalize them. The scent of stale bread and sour wine clings to the air as you muse on this. The rough texture of an imagined woolen blanket brushing against your skin in thought. So, as you sit in this inn woven from words, surrounded by the ghosts of pilgrims, knights, and rogues, you realize that these places are more than settings in a story. They're mirrors held up to the medieval soul, reflecting both its wanderlust and its weariness. The fire crackles softly in your mind, a gentle reminder of the warmth that stories can offer. Even when the night outside is cold and endless, you feel the weight of countless journeys in these walls, each one etched into the lines of poetry and prose that have carried inns through the ages. And as you linger here, wrapped in the quiet hum of ancient voices, you wonder what tales these walls would tell if they could speak beyond the page. Would they whisper of adventure, of loss, or simply of the fleeting comfort found in a stranger's company? Let the questions settle over you like a blanket, soft and heavy, as the inn of literature holds you in its timeless embrace. As the flickering light of the inn's hearth begins to dim in your mind, you find yourself stepping away from the bustling tales of pilgrims and merchants, away from the clatter of wooden mugs and the murmur of ancient gossip. The air grows cooler now, a subtle shift, as if the very walls of the medieval inn sense the turning of an era. You walk along a muddy path just outside, the once welcoming signboard creaking faintly in the wind, its painted symbols of a roaring lion or a golden chalice now faded, almost ghostly. The world around you feels heavier, the scent of damp earth and rotting straw mingling with the distant tang of smoke from a dying fire. This is no longer the vibrant crossroads of weary travelers. This is the slow, melancholic decline of the medieval inn, a silent witness to changing times and forgotten roads. You pause by the sagging wooden fence that marks the inn's boundary, your boots sinking slightly into the mire. The inn behind you, once a beacon on a perilous journey, now seems to slump under the weight of neglect. The thatched roof is patchy, with tufts of straw missing like the thinning hair of an old man who has seen too many winters. Windows that once glowed with the promise of warmth are shuttered or broken, letting in draughts that whisper of abandonment. You can almost hear the echoes of laughter that once filled the common room, now replaced by the soft drip of rainwater through unseen cracks. It's as if the inn itself mourns its own fading relevance, a relic of a world that no longer needs its kind of shelter. You run your fingers along the rough grain of the fence, feeling the splinters catch at your skin, and you wonder how it came to this. The answer drifts to you like a half-remembered dream carried on the chill breeze. The medieval inn, for all its rustic charm, was born of necessity in a fragmented world of muddy tracks and isolated villages. But as the centuries crept forward, particularly into the late Middle Ages and beyond, the roads began to change. History tells us that by the 15th and 16th centuries, The rise of more centralized kingdoms and the slow improvement of infrastructure, think of the ambitious road building under monarchs like Henry VIII in England, meant that travel became marginally less of a death wish. Permanent coaching inns and post houses started to appear, state-sanctioned and often better equipped, leaving the old, ramshackle roadside taverns to wither like unwatered crops. But it's not just the roads that turned their backs on these places. You glance over your shoulder at the inn, imagining the last innkeeper sweeping out the cold ashes of the hearth. The world of trade and travel shifted beneath their feet too. With the growth of towns and the steady hum of early capitalism, merchants began to favor urban centers over rural stopovers. Why risk a night in a drafty inn with questionable stew when you could push on to a walled city with a proper market and a guild hall? And let's be honest, the stew at these fading inns probably started tasting more like boiled regret than anything nourishing. You smirk to yourself, picturing a weary traveler poking at a bowl and muttering, "I've had better soup in a swamp." You take a slow step along the path, the silence around you broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves skittering across the ground. There's a peculiar little detail that lingers in your mind, something you might not expect amidst all this decay. Did you know that some of these declining inns, in their final years, became makeshift pigeon lofts? Yes, as trade routes modernized, a few innkeepers, desperate to stay relevant, turned to housing carrier pigeons for local lords or merchants who needed quick messages sent. It's a strange image, isn't it? Pigeons cooing in the rafters, where once bawdy songs echoed, their droppings littering the same floors that once bore the muddy boots of knights. A sad little pivot, but a creative one, you must admit. Yet not all is gloom in this story of decline. You stop for a moment, leaning against a gnarled tree, its bark cool and damp under your palm. There's a debate among historians that adds a layer of intrigue to this slow fade. Some scholars argue that the decline of the medieval inn wasn't just about better roads or urban growth, but also about a shift in cultural values. They suggest, with furrowed brows over dusty tomes, that as the Renaissance dawned, so did a growing suspicion of the common spaces these inns represented. Elites began to see them as dens of vice and disorder, hardly the refined image they wanted to cultivate. Others push back, insisting it was purely economic, a matter of supply and demand. What do you think? Was it the purse or the pride that shuttered these doors? Take a moment to reflect on this, letting the question hang like the mist over a forgotten field. You start walking again, the path winding away from the inn now, its silhouette barely visible against the grey sky. The air smells of coming rain, a sharp, clean scent that cuts through the mustiness of decay. You can't help but chuckle softly at the thought of those last, desperate innkeepers trying to lure in travellers with promises of the best ale this side of nowhere, as if anyone believed them by that point. Or maybe they offered a free straw mattress, fleas included at no extra charge. It's a gentle jest, but it carries the weight of truth. Hospitality became a harder sell when the world moved on. Your steps slow as you reach a small rise in the path, and you turn for one last look at the inn. Its walls seem to sag even more in the dim light, the last of its warmth long since bled into the earth. You can almost taste the stale bread and watery ale that lingered in its final days, a far cry from the hearty, if simple, fare of its prime. The medieval inn, once a heartbeat on the lonely road, became a ghost of itself, overtaken by time and progress. And yet, isn't there something poignant in that? You stand there, the wind tugging at your cloak, and you feel the weight of all those stories left behind. Tales of weary feet, whispered secrets, and fleeting camaraderie, now buried under layers of dust and silence. You turn away at last, the path stretching ahead into the unknown, much like the future that awaited these forgotten havens. The medieval inn may have declined, its timber rotting and its hearth growing cold, but its memory clings to the edges of history like the scent of wood smoke on an autumn evening. It reminds you, in its quiet way, that even the most steadfast shelters can crumble when the world shifts beneath them. What else, you wonder, do we take for granted today, assuming it will stand forever? The thought lingers as your footsteps fade into the dusk, the inn behind you dissolving into shadow, a whisper of a world that once was. As the shadows of history lengthen and the world outside the inn fades into the quiet of twilight, you find yourself lingering by the hearth one last time. The fire has burned low now, a soft crackle of embers casting a golden glow across the worn wooden floor. The air carries the faint scent of charred oak and the lingering tang of spilled ale, a reminder of the countless souls who have sought refuge here over centuries. You pull your cloak a little tighter, not against any chill, but as if to hold on to the fleeting warmth of this place, this medieval inn that has whispered its stories to you through the night. There's a heaviness in the silence, a weight of time that seems to settle into your bones as you ponder what this humble shelter has meant, not just to you in this imagined journey, but to the tapestry of human struggle and survival. You glance around the common room, now empty save for the ghosts of laughter and murmured secrets. The rough-hewn tables bear the scars of countless meals, the walls the echoes of hurried farewells and desperate plans. What is it about this place that lingers so stubbornly in the mind? Is it the idea of rest in a world that offered so little of it? Or is it something deeper, something almost primal, a longing for connection in an age when the road was long, the night was dark, and the next dawn was never promised? You can almost hear the innkeeper's gruff voice calling out one last time, urging stragglers to bed or back to the road, a voice that's both protector and profiteer. And let's be honest, if you overstayed your welcome, you'd probably wake up to find your boots missing. Hospitality had its limits after all. Let's wander outside for a moment, shall we? You step through the creaking door, the night air sharp against your skin, scented with damp earth and the faint musk of livestock penned nearby. The inn's signboard sways gently in the breeze, its painted emblem, a stag, a crown, or perhaps a crude tankard, barely visible in the moonlight. It's a beacon no longer needed, for the medieval inn as you've known it is slipping into the past. The world is changing, roads are widening, and the need for these rough-and-tumble havens is waning. But as you stand here, gazing at the sagging roofline and the flickering light in a lone window, you can't help but feel a quiet ache. This isn't just a building, it's a memory of a time when every journey was a gamble, every rest a small miracle. Historically, we know that by the late medieval period, inns began to decline as centralized powers and better infrastructure transformed travel. The rise of the Tudor era in England, for instance, saw the crown taking more control over roads and safety, reducing the need for these isolated outposts. Yet, even as they faded, their legacy endured in the villages and towns that grew around them, many of which owe their very existence to the foot traffic of weary pilgrims and merchants. Isn't it curious how a place so transient could leave such a permanent mark? You might chuckle to think that some modern pub down the road likely started as one of these very inns, though I doubt they still charge you in chickens or suspicious promises. There's a quirky little tidbit that lingers in the archives too. Did you know that some medieval inns were rumoured to keep a traveller S tally, a notched stick or crude ledger hidden behind the bar, tracking who owed what, often with bizarre nicknames like Bald John of the Muddy Boots or Eleanor with the Loud Snore? It's a small detail, but it paints such a vivid picture of the inn as a living, breathing ledger of human quirks, a place where even your worst traits might be immortalized in a scratch of ink. Can you imagine your own nickname etched into history? Perhaps dreamer of the late hour, lingering too long by the fire with thoughts too heavy for sleep. But not all is whimsy when we reflect on these places. Scholars still debate the true nature of medieval inns. Were they bastions of community or merely opportunistic dens of vice and exploitation? Some historians, like those following the social histories of the late 20th century, argue that inns were microcosms of medieval society, reflecting its hierarchies and tensions. A noble might sleep in relative comfort upstairs, while a peasant huddles in the straw below. And isn't that just a perfect snapshot of the era's rigid order? Others counter that inns were rare equalizers, places where, for a night, a shared tankard or a shared fear of bandits could blur those lines. What do you think? As you stand here in the imagined dark, the inn behind you a silent witness, does it feel like a place of unity or division? Take a moment to reflect on this, letting the quiet of the night settle around you like a soft, heavy cloak. You turn back toward the inn, your footsteps crunching on the uneven ground, the scent of dew already rising from the earth. There's a strange comfort in knowing that, even as these places faded, their essence seeped into the stories we tell. The medieval inn became more than a stop on the road. It became a symbol of rest in a restless age, a flicker of light against the vast, untamed dark. Every creak of its floorboards, every stain on its walls, whispers of a time when to travel was to risk everything, and to find shelter was to cheat fate for one more night. You can't help but smile softly at the thought of some poor soul, centuries ago, haggling over the price of a lumpy straw mattress, probably muttering under their breath about highway robbery. Some things, it seems, never change. And yet, as you linger here, the inn's silhouette against the starlit sky feels like a quiet farewell. Its time has passed, but its echoes remain in the way we still seek out places of rest, of connection, even in our modern hurried lives. Perhaps that's the true legacy of the medieval inn. Not the timber or the ale, but the idea that, no matter how far you roam, there's always a door waiting to open, a fire waiting to warm you, even if just for a night. You let out a quiet breath, the kind that feels like letting go, and imagine the innkeeper's ghost giving you a nod from the shadows, as if to say, "Safe travels, friend, but don't dawdle too long or I'll charge you double." So, as the night deepens and the world grows still, you take one last look at this place that has held so much: joy, fear, hunger, hope. The medieval inn may be a relic of a bygone age, but its spirit lingers in every roadside stop, every stranger's smile, every moment of unexpected kindness. And as you turn away, ready to let the road claim you once more, you carry with you the warmth of its hearth, the weight of its stories, and the quiet promise that, somewhere out there, rest will always find a way to meet you. Let the night wrap around you now, soft and heavy, as the echoes of this ancient shelter fade into the gentle rhythm of your thoughts, guiding you, perhaps, into dreams of roads yet untraveled.